Alright guys, 3 minutes after 5:30. I took a couple extra minutes there to collect myself after a short nap. But I think we should probably get started. I'm going to do a short intro. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than some of the other Crypto Bootshine episodes that I do. Today's episode is going to be focused purely on a review and analysis of the recent Ultima Weapon fight. If you're familiar with me, I do these I do these for nearly every tier. I've skipped a few tiers, but for some of the bigger tiers, what I'd like to do is for the end boss of a tier, take some time to sort of review the encounter, talk about the mechanics in them, discuss approaches to the mechanics, and maybe how we approach the mechanic or how somebody else approached the mechanic, and just sort of break down the thought processes that go into them. And it's usually a lot of fun, and for UCOB, I did one and had a lot of fun with it. So I find that there's a lot to talk about with these ultimate encounters that they're releasing. So I'm expecting more of the same today with the Ultima Weapon discussion. Before I get started, I want to sort of preface and let you guys know that I will be trying to watch chat as much as I can while I'm talking. So this can always be a discussion, as with most of my shows. There's going to be because the fight is kind of relatively new. There may be things that I may not be 100% on, that I may have to sort of deflect to opinions of you guys. I think for the most part I have a good grasp in this fight. There's one area of the fight where I wouldn't call myself hazy, but I would call myself a little bit inexperienced with. And I'll highlight that when we get to it. But the show, I would expect today's show to go a little bit longer than my normal Crypto Bootshines. These videos that I do normally run a little bit over 2 hours. I can't imagine that this one's going to be any shorter than some of the other ones I've done. So, we'll just prepare for that. But I got my water here. I got my YouTube set up. So I think we're just ready to jump right into it. So the way that we're going to approach this basically is I have a video here prepared that is Miuni's POV from my team, and I like his POV because it doesn't have any background music. It only has the background music. It doesn't have any background voice comms or anything, so it's very easy to talk over. The way that I want to approach this is we'll go through the video, we'll watch portions of the video, I'll be pausing a lot and sort of discussing what we're seeing on screen, and I think when I typically do these, we always play the video start to finish before we do that. I think I don't want to waste time doing that. I'm going to expect anyone here watching this now live or on YouTube later that you've already seen the fight in its entirety on a video, either through video or through doing it yourself. I think that is the expectation that I do have for anybody watching this. So if you're on YouTube right now and you haven't done that, I recommend pause this, go watch the video in its entirety, and then come back. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Let's give a little bit of background info about sort of how the fight pans out in its entirety. Ultima Weapon, as we sort of expected, is an encounter where we go through a medley of the original 3 Realm Reborn primals, Garuda, Ifrit, and Titan. And then you transition into the actual encounter with Ultima Weapon himself afterwards. Discussing the primals, and as we go through and watch the video, will be a little bit interesting because of a reason that I'll explain shortly. But to sort of preface it, there's more than one way to actually do these primals. There's a wrong way, a quote unquote wrong way, and a right way. And I'll explain why once we get started. It'll be easier to understand when you see it. But for the purpose of this video, I do want to say that I'm going to be focusing on the right way of doing these phases, and not spend time on mechanics that you see if you do the primals the wrong way. I think that's a good enough preface. So without further ado, let's get this thing started. The volume levels should be okay. I tested them extensively before we started. So I mentioned earlier that the primals that we're going to be dealing with are Garuda, Ifrit, and Titan, and we're going to be dealing with them in that order specifically. We'll be fighting the primals one by one, one-on-one to start. After you pull Garuda, the first thing that you're going to encounter is a marker that's actually new to the ultimate Garuda. This is not a marker that you see in the old Garudas. What you'll see with these primals is a lot of throwbacks to familiar mechanics from their hard mode and extreme versions. This marker is what'll happen is Garuda is going to do her iconic slipstream on the main tank and throw out a marker on one of the two healers. I think in our experience it was always the farthest healer, but don't quote me on that. And what this marker basically is Garuda shoots out a Mistral Song at the target, and the first target that she hits with the Mistral Song places a large cyclone tornado on the map. And also, the first player hit by it takes additional damage. It's a cleave attack, it's a cone attack, and the way that you want to handle this marker is by putting a tank in front of the player with the marker so they can absorb the brunt of the damage, and then anyone standing behind the tank takes a reduced amount of damage. This is a very important thing to remember for a later phase of the fight. That's why I spent this time in the opening period here going over it, because we're going to be seeing this a couple times throughout the fight. So the way we handle this mechanic is, just like I said, you put a tank in front of the cone, and the first player hit by it will spawn the tornado, so we'll move out of the tornado. Shortly after that slipstream marker combo, we're going to be seeing our old buddies from the other modes of Garuda, the Plumes. When we see our good buddy there, the Spiny Plume. If you guys remember extreme mode of Garuda, the Spiny Plume makes an appearance and does the stacks of... I actually don't know what they were called in Extreme. They might be called Thermo Highs in Extreme. I'm not sure. But what Spiny Plume basically did in the Extreme version was put a stacking debuff on the target that it was attached to, and when that debuff reached 3, it did a super cyclone and was a lot of damage to your raid. So you wanted to avoid that stacking debuff getting to 3. This Spiny Plume works a little bit differently, somewhat the same, but also a little bit differently. It still puts a stacking debuff on you, but the stacking debuff on you doesn't necessarily explode right when it gets to 3. In addition to the Spiny Plume, you have Satin Plumes that spawn around the arena. These Satin Plumes are tethered to players, and you can just converge them to the center and AoE them down for no real threat. This is just get them off the map. If you, just like the other Satin Plumes, if you don't kill these in time, they will cast an AoE sleep at the end. So you're on sort of a timer here to clear the map of Satin Plumes. The tank that picks up the Spiny Plume doesn't actually do damage to the player that it's attached to and attacking. It's just applying that stacking debuff that we talked about earlier. What you actually do with the stacking debuff, you'll see in a few moments. At the same time as you're dealing with these plumes, Garuda's going to do a slipstream downburst combo, which is just something that the tank has to deal with. You just make sure you don't want to. You just want to make sure you don't cleave the raid. So you can see the debuff over here, and hopefully you guys can see my cursor. You should be able to. This debuff, we have Roxa in this clip taking the Spiny Plume, and this debuff is going to be stacking up to 2. 2 is a very important number. We'll get into that, and we'll get into why shortly. But what this debuff does is, when you kill the Spiny Plume, just like in the other mode, the Spiny Plume is going to spawn a green bubble, and this green bubble, what it does in the Ultima mode of Garuda is the debuffs that you have from the Spiny Plume, which I believe are called Thermal High. When you enter the green bubble, does protect you from wind damage. But when you enter the green bubble, it's going to clear your Thermal High stacks, and when it does, depending on the number of stacks that you clear, it's going to super cyclone the raid. A 1 stack is going to deal about 6,000 damage raid wide, and clearing a 2 stack of Thermal High is going to clear upwards of 20,000, I want to say, 20 plus. But the importance of cleansing these stacks is going to take a little bit of time to explain, and I'm debating whether or not to go through the entirety of Garuda and then go. I think that's what we should do. I'll probably skip over the importance of why we should cleanse the stacks of Thermal High here, and then we'll revisit it once Garuda's finished. I think that's the best way to approach this. So we'll cover the basics of Garuda right now, and then go back to talk about like why we were doing the things that we were doing. So Garuda at this point in time is going to cast 2 frictions, and what friction is, it's a little bit similar to the other modes, but with one key difference. Friction is going to be applying stacks of Thermal High to all of the targets that it hits, oh yeah, chat's saying it's more than 30,000 damage unmitigated with 2 stacks. I think we actually do mitigate the 2 stacks quite a bit. That's why I probably am calling it 20,000. So the frictions that she's casting here are going to be applying stacks to everyone that it hits. You're going to notice if you watch the party frame over here, and it's important to not confuse it with confession stacks, but if you're looking for the Thermal High stacks over here, you're going to notice that we're going to be getting a lot of people hit by this debuff, and I'll discuss why in a moment. The thing that I can say right now is that these stacks are actually used to defend yourself against one of Garuda's later attacks, and you'll see what that attack is shortly. So before we move on, I do want to highlight this thing right here. This is something that's going to be a topic in all the primals. I mentioned earlier that there's a wrong way and a right way to do these primals, and this is sort of what I'm talking about right here. So what's really unique about this encounter, and I want to take a moment to discuss this. What's really unique about this encounter is you're able to go through the primals and do all the mechanics correctly and find yourself reaching a point in the fight where you feel like you've done everything correctly, however you cannot proceed. And the reason for that is the way this encounter is designed is it's actually designed in a way that you want to do some things, I don't want to say incorrectly, but you want to do some things not necessarily linearly, because the key mechanic to these 3 primals is the ability to awaken them. And the way that you awaken these primals, and I'll talk about the reason for awakening later, but the way that you awaken these primals is performing very specific conditions for dealing with the mechanics in their phases. And when you do a very specific mechanic a very specific way, it will give a stack to the boss, and when the boss reaches 4 stacks, the primal awakens and gains new abilities or augments old abilities to behave differently. And that's what I was referring to when I was talking about a right way and a wrong way. The true way of going through the primals is you want to awaken every single primal. And for the purpose of this video, I'm only going to be discussing the mechanics that awaken the primals, because that is how you should approach this fight. This was one of the most interesting parts of progression. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that this was a very unique interaction. Having sort of alternate win conditions where one set of win conditions is right and the other set of win conditions is wrong is not really something we've seen in encounters in the past. And I thought that was really awesome, and it's definitely one of my favorite memories and moments of this bit of progression. Let's talk about Garuda, I guess, and the stacks that Garuda is gaining and how we get Garuda to 4 stacks to awaken Garuda. We talked about the frictions giving stacks. The way that you give Garuda awaken stacks is by cleansing a player who has 2 stacks or more of Thermal High. You give Garuda an awaken stack. And this bubble here we talked a little bit about. This green bubble that spawns from the Spiny Plume, by entering it, you cleanse your stacks. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be having a specific amount of players being hit by both of the frictions to get both of those sets of players up to 3 stacks. Up to 2 stacks, and then we're going to cleanse them to give Garuda a stack. So hopefully that makes sense. But you're going to see that play out here. We're going to be getting cleaved by the friction. Then we're going to enter the bubble to cleanse the stacks and give Garuda an awaken stack. And this is all to advance our goal of making Garuda hit 4 stacks so that we can awaken her. I should probably note that this is there's a bit of a funny oversight here by the developers. We actually had this confirmed earlier today that this was an oversight. The intended design for this phase was that you actually awaken Garuda right here. But what you'll find is that because of an interaction at the ending of the phase here, you actually don't need to awaken her right here, and you can awaken her at the end and skip a lot of headache, not having to deal with some of the new Awaken mechanics until the very end of the fight. They did confirm there was a bit of an oversight. They didn't really plan for that, and they were surprised when they saw players awakening her late. So the second friction is going out here. We're going to be sending 2 players into the bubble here. Our goal, like I said, we're going to awaken her later into the phase because it's easier. So our goal here is to get Garuda to 3 stacks, and then at the end of the phase, awaken her with the final 4th stack. So to get the first stack, we sent the tank with the 2 stack of Spiny Plume into the bubble immediately. We then had 2 DPS sit outside the bubble and get hit by both frictions, and then they're going to be entering the bubble one by one to get the 2nd and 3rd stacks. So now she's reached 3 stacks, and the bubble is faded in time. And if you guys are familiar with the other Garuda encounters, you'll remember the classic feather rain. Anytime Garuda flies away to the sky, she leaves behind her feather rain, and you just need to move away from your position. It basically locks on to a specific amount of players' position on the map and drops feathers there that apply a very, very threatening wind-based dot. So move away from your current position as soon as Garuda or any of her sisters fly away from the map. So she comes back with one of her ultimate attacks, the Aerial Blast. Does a lot of damage, but it's not too bad to mitigate. So this is when we see the infamous duo of Tirada and Suparna make their ultimate entrance. They're going to come down for a short moment, and they're going to fly away again just to fuck with you and drop a feather rain. And we're going to see the reoccurrence of the green marker we saw at the beginning of the fight, the Mistral Song marker, except that this time it's instead of coming from Garuda, these are Mistral Songs that are coming from Tirada and Suparna on the edge of the map. And hopefully I can get a good angle of them. But yeah, so at least we see one over here. So there's a couple different ways you can position yourself to deal with this. Because there are 2 markers here, in my opinion, the easiest way to deal with this is just put both of the markers middle and put your one tank in front of one sister, the other tank in front of the other sister, and absorb the hits that way. That was my preferred method of doing it. Some people like to leave Garuda in the middle. At the same time as you're absorbing these Mistral Song attacks, Garuda's going to do a Wicked Wheel. She is not awoken yet. Wicked Wheel is one of the mechanics that changes when she is awoken. So this is one of the perks here of not awakening her early. You have to, you get the benefit of dealing with an easier Wicked Wheel. The non-awoken Wicked Wheel is just a simple Iron Chariot. If you're familiar with that mechanic, just get away from the boss. Just like with the other Missile Song from the beginning of the fight, the first player hit by these drops a giant wind cyclone on the map. I think it's actually called Giant Cyclone. So just move out of these. These have 1 tick and then they explode. I think Jacobo, you're right. I think I was mistaken. Thermal Low is the debuff, the stacking debuff. I knew it. Thermal High doesn't sound right. Thermal High is when you are inside the bubble, I believe, correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. But regardless of the name, the interaction, the mechanic is accurate. So once you take the Mistral Songs and the Cyclones are away, these Spiny Plumes are going to return. Because we haven't awoken Garuda yet, this is a set of mechanics that doesn't actually appear when Garuda is awoken. You have to deal with a different set of mechanics. This is the benefit of awakening Garuda late. You get to deal with an easier set of mechanics. Satin Plumes are going to make a return. You bring them in the middle, burn them down. At the same time, we have tethers coming from the sisters, and this is the first time we've seen these tethers. And these tethers are very important. What these tethers do is these are called meso-high tethers. And we talked a little bit about earlier how we were having everybody get hit by the friction to give everyone the thermal stacks. And what you do is you use the thermal stack. You use players with the thermal stack to pick up these tethers and absorb the meso-high damage. What the meso-high tether will do is it's going to, as long as you're protected by a thermal stack buff, you won't die. However, the meso-high will cleanse the thermal stack and deal a super cyclone based on, similar to the bubble from earlier. It's going to deal a super cyclone based on the amount of stacks that you had. 1 stack is going to be very livable, 2 stack is going to need some mitigation, etc. So what we're going to do here, this is the point in time where we're going to get that 4th and final awakening stack to finally awaken Garuda. So we need to make sure, at least with the strategy that we're doing here, that one of the meso-highs is cleansing a 2-stack player, because as we talked about earlier, the specific key to getting Garuda a stack is to cleanse a 2-stack of thermal. So we're going to be putting a meso-high tether on a 2-stack thermal tank, and the second meso-high tether here on a DPS with a 1-stack. As long as you have a stack, you will live, and we only need 1 more awakening stack, so that's the reason for that. So I'll grab the tether here with my 2-stack. The 2-stack will get cleansed, and as you can see by the emote that the Primal does here, Primal is now awoken, and you'll be able to see a visual effect around the Primal, and her mechanics have now changed. So some of the mechanics that change, we talked a little bit about the Wicked Wheel earlier. The change to Wicked Wheel, which is the first thing you're going to see coming up here after the substream. The change to Wicked Wheel is going to be, not only is it an Iron Chariot mechanic, but shortly after the Iron Chariot, Garuda will cast a Dynamo-like ability, where everything but the area close to proximity of Garuda is covered in wind. So it's her Wicked Wheel now doesn't just become a get out, it becomes a get out and then get in. The second thing to change with Garuda here is the downburst cleave that the tank was facing away from the party before is no longer just a cleave that the tank absorbs. Her downburst ability actually becomes a party soak. So that's why you see here I'm going to be turning Garuda towards the party and cleaving everybody with a downburst there. So the Awakened Primals are really cool because they take mechanics that are simple in nature and apply interesting little twists to them that definitely change how you approach them. And this was a really cool thing to prog for this reason. You go through these Primals for hours, learning their normal mechanics, and then when you realize the correct way to proceed through the fight itself is to awaken the Primals. It's almost like you're going back and you're progressing through somewhat new phases because you're dealing with new mechanics and new interactions with those mechanics. So this was like a really cool part of progression. And I think that concludes kind of everything that goes on with Garuda. This is the first of the 3 primals that we're going to be discussing. And we had to sort of go over some of the basics of the awakening mechanism and sort of preface that for the remainder of the fight. So I don't imagine Ifrit and Titan will spend as much time on as we just did Garuda. But right after Garuda is when Ifrit's going to enter the field, and he's going to enter with his Crimson Cyclone. The way that you deal with this is he's going to cover the entire field with Radiant Plumes, as you'll see in a second. He's going to spawn on a random Cardinal, and he's going to dash straight ahead through from Cardinal to Cardinal. And there are safe zones at all 4 Cardinals, so you go to the Cardinal that is 90 degrees from one of the Cardinals that he spawned. Excuse me, there's not safe zones all around the arena. There are safe zones 90 degrees and 180 degrees from him, and the safe zone that is 90 degrees from him is it's random, whether it's 90 degrees clockwise or 90 degrees counterclockwise. So the way you deal with this mechanic right here is the room gets covered in plumes. You look at Ifrit or at a static marker. If you're looking at Ifrit, which is what I prefer to do, if the right is covered, you go left. If the left is covered, you go right. So we identify the safe zone, move into it. Ifrit's going to charge to the map. And now we start the Ifrit phase. Ifrit's going to open the phase with Hellfire, his ultimate attack. You do need to mitigate this. This requires at least probably 2 tools of mitigation. We found that a Sucker plus X usually handles these ultimate attacks. So you'll be seeing, shields in Reprisal, shields in Soil, stuff like that. Now, Ifrit is a bit of a menace when you're first progging him. Some of his mechanics are quite fast-paced compared to the Ifrit, previous iterations of Ifrit that we're accustomed to. The first thing that he's going to do is he's going to open with his triple flare breath combo, which is sort of iconic to Ifrit and specifically Ifrit Extreme. With a bit of a twist on this one though, this one actually applies a Vuln debuff, or Fire Vuln debuff, that is a pretty serious Vuln. I think the intended handling of this mechanic is they give you enough time to do tank swaps in between the breath. So you can have one tank be hit by the first breath, shirk it onto the other tank. The second tank will take the second breath. And then they have a bit of a lapse of time before the third breath that sort of allows you to heal up that first tank. And the first tank can take the boss back for the first breath again because his debuff will be off by then. My team and I found it to be a bit easier to just throw invulnerabilities at this. It sort of just makes it brain dead. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about positioning. You don't have to worry about provoke timings or threat or anything. So you'll be seeing us here just invulning the triple breaths. Now, let's talk about the Awaken mechanics for Ifrit, because like I mentioned earlier, our goal here is we want to awaken all 3 primals. The way that you awaken Ifrit, you're going to be seeing Ifrit spawn 4 sets of nails here in a moment, and at the same time as the nails is going to be a series of eruptions on 2 ranged players on the outer edges. And what we're going to be aiming to do here is every time you hit a nail with an eruption, it's going to give that nail a buff, and that buff is stacks up to 2 times. And your goal here to give Ifrit the 4 stacks that he needs to awaken is for each nail, you need to get the nail to 2 stacks via 2 eruptions and kill the nail with 2 stacks. If you kill a nail with less than 2 stacks from eruptions, you will not get Ifrit a buff. And the whole point here is that we want to awaken Ifrit. So the nails have spawned, and the positioning of these nails is very important for a later mechanic that we'll talk about when we get there. But you're gonna be seeing us marking the nails in a very specific order, and we're gonna be killing them in a very specific order. It's important that we do not kill them until they get both stacks from the eruptions, otherwise the mechanic has failed. So you're gonna see us getting the nails low, making sure they hit 2 stacks, and then killing them in a specific order. And I guess this is a good time to talk about the order. There's not too much going on here. The reasoning for killing the nails in a specific order is each nail that you kill here determines the order of lanes in which Ifrit is going to use Crimson Cyclones later. Crimson Cyclone is the dash attack that Ifrit uses across the arena. So we're going to kill the nails in a very specific order that allows us to basically dodge the Ifrit dashes in a controlled manner. So I just marked them 1, 2, 3, 4. We kill 1, then we kill 2, then we kill 3, then we kill 4. So as you can see, we waited till the nails all reached 2 stacks here. Ifrit has now reached his awakened state. It's glowing blue, just like Garuda was, and some of Ifrit's mechanics have changed. The first mechanic that we'll interact with that's changed is the I guess it's actually the Fireball. I wanted to say the Crimson Cyclones because those are the important topic here, but it is actually the Fireball, so I'll let the video play out. So Ifrit's going to jump away, he's going to come back with the Hellfire. Just do a quick bit of mitigation here. Shortly after he comes back from the Hellfire, he's going to put everybody's favorite Searing Wind from Inferno Howl on one of 2 healers. That player, just like the other modes, moves away from the party. Searing Wind behaves pretty similarly. The eruptions he's casting here are range-based, to my knowledge. The strategy that we're using in this video kind of circumvents any care for that. I think the better strategy, if I was teaching somebody how to do this fight raw right now, post progression, it is probably a better idea to bait these eruptions away from the boss so that you can keep uptime. However, what you'll see here is we're just going to be moving as a team away from the eruptions and dragging Ifrit with us. But it does lose some uptime here, so not a very refined strategy. You'll see, I don't know if you saw on the edge. Let me rewind a little bit right here. So while we're doing this dance of eruptions, there are 2 Ifrit clones in the arena, and these Ifrit clones are going to do Crimson Cyclone dashes. You'll notice that the one's on each cardinal lane. So that means the corner quadrants of the room are an automatic safe zone, and that's why we moved this direction that we did. Shortly after the Crimson Cyclone dashes right there, he's going to put a second Searing Wind, and this is actually this is the first, I think, Awoken Mechanics has changed, because he does, I don't think he does 2 Searing Winds here, because not Awoken, but it's been so long since I haven't Awoken it for it, I can't necessarily remember. He'll put a second Searing Wind out on the map right now, so both healers have it for a short while. So right here, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a red fireball marker on your screen over, I think, Arya. What this fireball marker is going to do is it's a soak mechanic, and depending on the number of players that soak this fireball, and this is part of his Awaken changes, it's going to put a dot, and the length of the dot is determined by the number of players that soak this fireball. So we're going to soak it with as many people as possible. You're actually going to see me in this clip miss the fireball. So I think somebody dies here because of an extended dot duration. So we had a less than ideal stack for it. So the fireball goes out. Dot's a little bit dicey right there, and now we get to the really key moment of the Ifrit phase. This is the set of Crimson Cyclones that we were preparing for earlier when we were dealing with the nail order. And the reasoning for the order of which we killed the nails is for this point alone. We want to create a situation where the dives are moving clockwise consecutively, one by one, and not going back and forth to lanes across from each other. So ideally, if we've done properly, what's going to happen is we're going to be over here at 1. This lane here from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, this A to C lane, is going to be the first lane to dive, and then the next lane over clockwise, and then the next lane over clockwise, and we're going to move basically following the dives until we reach the end point. The end point for this mechanic, and I kind of want to let the Crimson Cyclones play out because it'll be easier to see and then explain. The end point for this mechanic is determined by the glowing blue Ifrit. There's only one on the map. That's the real Ifrit, and we want to end in the real Ifrit's lane. You'll see why. So the 12 o'clock lane goes, then the lane adjacent to it, then the lane adjacent to that, and then the final 4th lane. And then at the end of those 4 dashes, you guys saw there was an extra set of AoE that went out, and that is part of the Awaken mechanic. What's happening here is, depending on the lane that the real blue Ifrit is in, Awaken Crimson Cyclones leave behind a cross attack that goes cardinally. It always goes cardinally. So, or I'm sorry, it goes if the Awaken, that's actually not true. It goes cardinally when the Awakened blue Ifrit is intercardinal. It basically goes opposite of the Awakened blue Ifrit. So we want to end in the lane that the blue Ifrit is at, because that is the lane that won't be double charged by the following set of 2 Crimson Cyclone dashes. So we'll watch this play out again. The 4th Crimson Cyclone has gone out. The blue Ifrit is charged, and the blue Ifrit charged cardinally. Therefore, the intercardinals are going to be covered in a set of additional Ifrit dives here, right there. So that's the logic behind ending in the blue Ifrit's lane. If you end in the blue Ifrit's lane, then you're guaranteed to be safe from the cross attack afterwards. So we're in the final portion of the Ifrit phase here. This is just a pretty straightforward just burn with a few set of eruptions and 1 final Searing Wind tick. He is going to do a final set of 3 flare breaths here, or fire breaths rather. Again, we found it simplest to just throw an invulnerability here. I'm going to use a home gang here, and we're going to utilize the cover to take the final hit. It is entirely feasible to do tank swaps to do this mechanic. When we didn't have vulnerabilities, we found ourselves doing that. Just make sure you're on point with your Evoke and your shirk timing to make sure that the second hit goes away from the tank and away from the party. So meanwhile, after the third Flare Breath here, Ifrit's going to prepare another set of eruptions on the two farthest players. You won't get to see much of the remainder of this phase. There is a Fireball at the very end of this phase before he enrages. We're actually going to be phasing here, so we're going to not be seeing the Fireball, unfortunately. But just bait the eruptions aside and reconvene with the party. And it's very important that the party reconvenes here because we got a big transition coming up. Let me take a sip of water. So we've gone through Garuda, we've gone through Ifrit. That just leaves one boy, the big boy himself, and he's going to come in hot. Actually, this is something I didn't talk about with the Garuda thing, so it's really important that I pause here. Let me rewind a couple seconds. This is actually super important. So we've talked about the Awaken mechanics, but we haven't talked about the purpose of Awakening. The purpose of awakening the primals is this thing right here, this beam of light right here. And Garuda left behind one of these too, I just didn't highlight it. But this is a buff that one player in the party can pick up. And we will discuss later in the fight what the buff actually does, but just to give you guys a heads up, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting the three buffs that these Awakened Primals drop, one on a healer, one on a melee DPS, and one on a ranged DPS. Specifically for us, it is easiest if we put the buff on the caster DPS as opposed to the physical range DPS, and you will see why in a couple minutes. So the first one we actually put on a healer. You might be able to see it on the party list here. It's this thing right here on Muni. This one we're going to give to Spia, our caster. And we talked about the big boy coming in hot. He comes in with a Geocrush that is based on proximity damage. And the proximity damage is really tight. You have to be really, really, really directly on the wall. If you're directly on the wall, you take very minimal damage. If you're slightly not on the wall, you take a lot of damage. So very important you start this phase just on the edge of the arena. And be careful when you're moving in to not pick up the buff on somebody that you don't want the buff. So after the Geocrush, he opens with his ultimate attack, Earth and Fury. Gets the mitigation down, Sucker, Soil, Reprisal. And then right after the Earth and Fury, he opens with everybody's classic favorite, the Table Flip. Before this tech goes out, I just want to let you guys know, Mountain Buster hits fucking hard. You don't see it there because I have a lot of mitigation up, but if you're not prepared for his Mountain Busters, and there's really not cast bars for these tank busters from the primals. There weren't cast bars back in the day for them either. So if you're not prepared, if you don't understand the sequence of attacks that the primals do, you can get deleted. After the table flip, we get a weighted land dodge that nobody should be surprised about. It's nothing different than you deal with in Titan Extreme. And then he jumps away. What happens when he jumps away is he faces a side of the map, specifically a cardinal, and he's going to jump to that cardinal that he faced and Geocrush that area. So you need to move away from the cardinal that he faced because Geocrush is proximity damage. After the Geocrush, we move in, we get to Titan, and then we get to one of the sort of unique interactions with Ultimate Titan. Upheaval is, if you remember, it's the ability where he lifts up his leg and then slams down on the ground and then knocks back into players radially from him. I don't know if Miyu turns around here. Hopefully he does, yeah. So let me actually get a pause at the right moment. Okay, so as you can see in the back of the arena right now, there are a bunch of Titan bombs, and if you can see here, one of the areas there's four spots for Titan bombs in the back and two directly up front, except that one of the bombs of the four in the back is missing, and it can either be the left inner bomb or the right inner bomb. So the goal here, to nobody's surprise, is you're supposed to get knocked back into the safe zone created by created by the bomb opening. So line yourself up. It's a very, very precise angle that you need to make. Probably the easiest way that I can recommend to do this knockback is using Titan's actual target reticule. If you line yourself up on the side of the pointing arrow here on the edge of the reticule, that will angle yourself perfectly to get knocked back into the safe zone. If you go a little bit too far, you'll get knocked into a bomb on the side and die. So it's a very, very small change of movement. It's a pretty large knockback, so you have to start pretty close to him. So you get knocked in the safe zone, the bombs explode around you, and then an additional new bomb is going to spawn behind us in the party. Now, I don't know if you can see it. See if I can get a frame where you can see it. Okay, this is probably a good enough frame. If you can see these yellow markers, hopefully it picks up on the stream, but if you can see these are the jail markers, and you probably can't see that there's 3 of them, but there are 3 of them. And this is where the Titan's Awoken Mechanics are going to come into play. I'm going to let this play out, and then we'll backtrack a little bit and talk about what's actually happening. But the sequence of events here is we get knocked back, the jail markers go out on 3 different players, a new bomb spawns in the back of the room that you want to move away from, because when a bomb spawns in Ultimate Titan, it does damage in a radius around its spawn called Berry, and that damage is lethal. So you want to move away from where it's going to spawn. So we're going to be moving toward Titan immediately, but while we're moving toward Titan, Titan's going to throw out a landslide, and the landslide is baited on the player, so we want to be moving in a straight line. For reasons that I won't explain just yet, the jails are going to get into a specific set of positions here, and the party is going to move to a side away from the jails. When the jails spawn, the party wants to be away from them. Titan's going to deal 2 landslides here. The jails are in a position. And what you'll notice here is that these jails exploded without any interaction from the party. And let's actually talk about why that is. So this is the introduction to the Awakening of Titan. Let's go back a little bit farther, actually. Let's go to right here. So this is when we've been knocked back. The bombs are right here, as you can see. And I mentioned earlier, and it's unfortunate that you doesn't turn around because you can't really see it. But there's a bomb spawning in the back of the room. The way that you awaken Titan is when a jail explodes or a bomb explodes, specifically, I guess, a jail, for importance here. When a jail explodes, it leaves behind a sludge puddle. And the way that you'll give Titan the 4 awakening stacks that we need to give him is Titan needs to be standing and residing for upwards of 12 seconds inside a sludge puddle. About every 3 seconds or so, he's going to gain a stack while he's standing inside a sludge puddle. So the way that you... the interaction that you need to know to understand what's happening on screen is the bomb that spawns in the back of the room that we mentioned, that we don't actually get to see in the video. The explosion from that bomb actually explodes nearby jails, and that's going to be utilized to our advantage, because what we're going to do is we're essentially going to leapfrog jails across the arena with the first Titan bomb exploding the first jail, then that jail exploding the next jail, and then that jail exploding the final 3rd jail. And if we've spaced the jails out properly, we'll be extended far enough across the arena for that 3rd and final jail, the sludge from that jail, to actually be under Titan's hitbox. And that is the only way that you get the sludge to Titan in time in order to have him reside in the sludge for the full 12 seconds required. So that is the reasoning for the specific jail position that you're going to be seeing on screen here, and the reason why they're going to be spaced out across the arena linearly. This, I think, was one of the probably least intuitive of the Primal Awakenings. I think the other ones were mostly pretty straightforward to figure out. I found that this one was the least intuitive of the 3, especially the chain reaction interaction between the jails. That was something that I really did not expect. So you can see, you'll be able to see them kind of coming in one by one, exploding. leave him behind the sludges. So there's the sludge. It's under Titan's hitboxer now. And any moment now you'll be seeing the Awaken stacks start to appear. There's the first one. So about every 3 seconds he'll get a stack. While this is all going on, the reasoning why you can't just pull him onto the sludge to have to make this easier is he's doing tumults and he's animation locked up front. Now Titan is officially going to awaken here in a second. All right, now he's awakened. That's indicated by the emote that he does. He's gonna do his way to the lands, and then we're going to get our first encounter with his first Awoken mechanic, and that's going to be an augmented landslide. And this was a doozy the first time we got to it. I'm pretty sure the first time anybody got to the Awoken landslide, it was a bit of a doozy, because you were not prepared. So I'm going to pull him to the center for ease of use, and he's going to cast Landslide. The first Landslide is going to go out similar to his other Landslides. And then because he's awoken, immediately following his Landslide, he's going to do an instant cast Landslide. The Landslides are going to alternate. If one Landslide is going Cardinal, the instant cast Landslide that follows from the Awoken Augmented Landslide is going to be going Intercardinal. So they're going to alternate lanes basically. So that's why you stand in the safe zone for one, and then move into a different safe zone for the next one. I will be very impressed if there's a single group on the planet that did not instantly wipe to this augmented landslide the first time seeing it. Nobody was ready for it instant one as soon as that. I think that so a lot of people going into Prague knew that they were going to be instant cast landslides because of a lot of the data mining that happened. However, the idea that the Awoken landslide becomes an instant cast landslide was not something that was, I guess, obvious to our team. So again, that was a period where, again, Titan faces a cardinal direction of the map, jumps away, and he geocrushes that area. The arena is shrinking over time, so we're getting less and less area to dodge for those geocrushes. We dodge a geocrush, move back to Titan, then Titan is going to pick one of the healers to jail, and in his awoken state, he's going to do a very fast landslide after this jail, and every single landslide from this point on is going to be an awoken landslide, so it's going to be that double instant landslide. So we need to break the healer out of the jail quickly so that he can prepare for the landslide. Actually, the jail, I think this is actually an awoken jail. I should say not the awoken landslide here is not the issue. The fact that it's awoken jail, the time that you have to kill the jail is much less than when he's unawoken. So he's going to jail a healer. We're going to be saving some cooldowns here to burn the healer out quickly before the granite explosion, which is what happens when the jail cast bar expires. Just as raid AoE damage wipes the raid. So we're going to burn the jail quickly. This is for most warriors. This is an IR. Break him out, and then we get a double landslide combo. Dodge one lane into the next lane, and then prepare for some of the final Titan mechanics here. He's going to do a set of tumults into another table flip. There's the table flip, and shortly after this table flip is going to be a series of Titan bombs spawning by Barry in the center of the arena. They're going to be spawning and moving. They're going to be spawning one by one in a clockwise fashion. I believe I'm pretty sure it's clockwise. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember off the top of my head them not being clockwise. But for the way that we handle this mechanic, it's actually kind of irrelevant, and I think the way that a lot of people handle this mechanic is irrelevant. I've only seen one group stream handling this mechanic in the center of the map. What you're going to see is the Titan bombs that appear. The explosion radius of them does not actually extend to the outer edges of the map, so most rooms found it kind of intuitive and easy to just operate this mechanic on the outer edges of the map and not interact with the bombs at all. What we're going to be doing here is not something I would recommend, but this is we're going to be doing sort of a race car thing that you'll see play out. But we're going to be moving around the bombs and dodging weighted lands and landslides at the same time. Probably the best way to handle this mechanic is sort of centralize it in one area of the map. Do your weight of the lands in one area, then move, then weight of the land, and then move, and then deal with the final landslide. So we're going to spawn the weight of the land, we're going to wait for the second weight of the land, and then we're just going to Mario Kart and around the Rosie. There's going to be a third weight of the land landslide combo here, so we're going to move into a safe position, dodge the first landslide, dodging the bombs spawning clockwise in the middle of the arena, and then get in position for the second landslide. And then we're going to enter a final Mountain Buster combo into Tumult Spam. Oh no, YouTube, stop buffering, please. Oh no, YouTube. So we do have some weighted lands before the final set of Tumults. Titan has already been awoken much, in much earlier parts of the phase, so we're good to go. We're going to kill him, and we're going to get the third Beyond Limits buff. This buff I mentioned earlier, we wanted on a healer, a ranged DPS, and a melee. So we do not have one on our melee DPS yet. The melee DPS is going to grab this buff, and we now have all three buffs needed to proceed the fight. These buffs are required to proceed with the encounter. You actually cannot get past the next set of mechanics without these buffs. I will just say now what the buffs are actually going to do. We're going to have a bunch of ships crashing down along the arena. Actually, probably more interesting just to let it play out rather than just say it. So we have bits spawn around the arena, and these bits are casting self-destruct, so they need to be killed fast. The caster LB wipes these out clean. I've heard that a ranged physical DPS LB can handle these. I've never actually tried it myself, nor do I intend to, because the caster LB is so clean. But supposedly you can ranged LB the one side of the arena and then use cooldowns to clear the other half of the arena. Do not quote me on that. That is just a rumor. If it is a completely falsified rumor, I hold no responsibility. In theory, it should be possible, but it sounds like a massive headache. It's so much easier just bring faster. So we're going to cast LB these. I want you guys to pay attention to the LB bar. Remember, and also think back. We gave Sphia one of the buffs earlier, specifically the Awoken Ifrit buff. The buff is called Beyond Limits. Now, just consider that while the limit break is going on, and watch the limit bar over here. This is a really cool interaction. It's much more fun to let you see it than just say what's happening. So the LB bar is spent. Oh, what's happening? The LB bar is back. So what the Beyond Limits buff is doing is when you use the LB3 with the Beyond Limits buff, it gives you a free LB3 basically. And this is why you cannot proceed through the encounter without these Awoken Primal buffs. In order to bypass this mechanic right here, there's a down for the count Doom combo. In order to cleanse this Doom, you have to healer LB3. Excuse me. And in order to be at this point, you had the ranged LB. So if you don't have the free LB3s, you cannot proceed with the encounter right now. There was discussion at very early stages of Prague of a very, very, very heavy set of healing cooldown rotation right now to try and top without LB3. I don't even know if it's possible to top this up without LB3. It's a lot of healing in a very short amount of time due to down for the count. So yeah, we're gonna use the healer LB3 to cleanse the Doom here. We're gonna use the healer who has received the Beyond Limits buff earlier is gonna cast the LB because they're gonna get the free LB3. Cleanse the Doom, everyone heals up, and then La Habrea is gonna make his entrance to the fight. Everyone kind of expected that La Habrea was gonna make a cameo. He's very core and centric to the Ultima Weapon storyline. So La Habrea's little cameo here is very short-lived. However, what he does is he's going to cast Dark 4, and he has a I don't know if this is the reason, but he has a buff on him that basically makes him take reduced damage, and he has about 300,000 HP. And the way that you kill him before Dark 4 completely wipes your party is you kill him with a Beyond Limits melee LB. So as soon as we get the LB3 back, Our melee with the Beyond Limits buff is going to fire off the third LB3 here. And it will kill him before the Dark 4 finishes. And then we have the final part of this transition where Ultimate Weapon himself appears. Ultimate Weapon is going to enter the fight with a quick casting Ultima that you tank LB. This is the final set of Limit Break bar that you use here. The tank does not have a Beyond Limits buff, so you're spending the LB and you don't get it back here. And at this point, we've gone through all of the 3 sort of intro phases to the encounter. We're going to go through about a 90-second intermission here. I guess it's about a 60-second intermission here. The total from start to finish of LB spam at the end here is about 90 seconds. But IS is saying it's easy to top it without LB? Okay. So that was a really cool transition for what it's worth. He's going to absorb the primals. That's actually, I'm pretty sure, the cutscene just implemented into the fight. I think it's just the cutscene without the cinematic angles. He bites Garuda's head off, breaks Ifrit's neck, and pierces Titan's heart. So now we're starting the big boy himself, Ultimate Weapon, and this is, I think, when the fight picks up a little bit. Everything leading up to this point has just sort of been like fun, quirky prog. Just sort of, playing games of Clue, trying to solve the awakenings and how to awaken the primals, and the interactions needed to awaken the primals. At this point in the fight, things are going to start to pick up a bit. So the very first thing that, let me take a drink actually before we get into Ultimate Weapon. Okay, so the very first thing the Ultimate Weapon is going to do is going to open with a Tank Purge. Tank Purge is just a large AoE raid buster. And shortly after Tank Purge, he's going to do one of his pseudo Tank Busters. I don't know, you shouldn't really call him a Tank Buster. It's more of a raid buster. But he's going to apply, can't remember the name of the buff. It's an Aethero something or other. Puts an Aether Bomb of some sort on whoever the player with aggro. So I'm holding the aggro right now, so he puts it on me. I wish I could remember the name of that damn debuff rather. And what this basically is, you can't see it on my screen, but this is a ticking time bomb basically. It's a 10-second timer, and at the end of the 10 seconds, it's going to explode. And it's worth noting that the explosion is party soakable, and that'll be very important for a later phase. However, in the interest of keeping the boss position for my melee to get good positional uptime, I actually just super cooldown this and just sit away from the party. You can live it solo if you throw enough cooldowns at it, and that way I'm not interfering with any melee positionals. But if you did not want to do that, it is very easily party soaked right here. The party takes very minimal damage. The second mechanic the third mechanic that he's doing here after he puts the Aether Bomb on the main tank is he's going to target the player with second highest threat with homing lasers, and homing lasers are a sort of tank buster type mechanic that at the end of the cast bar he locks on to everything near the target that he's casting on. So the player with second highest threat wants to be away from the party and take the homing lasers away from anybody so that it doesn't cleave anybody or spread to anybody rather. It's a pretty heavy hitting attack, but because you're second on threat, you're not taking autos. So you just find the bare minimum to survive it and just survive it. So once those set of 3 mechanics are dealt with, we're going to be entering the first trio-esque phase. If you're familiar with UCOB, when I say trio, I'm basically referring to a phase that is a sort of mechanical dance where you're not really interacting with the boss's target. The boss is not untargetable, and he's not really interactable with. It's just a lot of mechanics on the screen, and it's just a series of dance moves that you deal with to get through the phase. This is, in my opinion, probably one of the least intuitive of the dances, mostly because there's just a lot going on the screen visually that it's hard to keep track of at times. until you get really comfortable with it. I think that this was sort of a roadblock for a lot of prog teams, like when they first got to Ultima. Compared to how the first 3 primals unfolded, this was kind of like a bit of a next step up in terms of planning and how you get through this phase. There are multiple ways for how you get through this cycle of mechanics. It's called Ultimate Predation, and I'm going to highlight specifically what's going on first, and then talk about some of the ways you can get through it. So what's going to happen is Ultima is going to teleport away, be untargetable, and Ultima is going to spawn on one of the 4 intercardinals. All 3 of the primals are going to make a return here, and they're all going to make a return in their awoken states. It's very, very, very important that you take note of what I just said. All the 3 primals are still in their awoken states. That means that any mechanics that they do are going to be Awoken Mechanics. And the 3 primals are going to come down and all use different variations of their Awoken Mechanics. So we have Titan, Ifrit, and Garuda making their appearance back in the field. Let's first talk about Titan. So Titan's going to spawn on any of the 4 cardinals slightly off-center, and the slightly off-center is really important for your ability to do this phase kind of cleanly. But unless you cheese it like we do. But Ultima Weapon is going to spawn on one of the inner cardinals, and Ifrit is going to spawn on one of the inner cardinals as well. So you have Titan on a cardinal, you have Ultima Weapon on an inner cardinal, and you have Ifrit on an inner cardinal. That just leaves Garuda. Where is Garuda? Garuda is not going to spawn on a wall, unlike the other primals. Garuda is going to spawn in the inner part of the arena in one of 4 locations. And these 4 locations are basically the 4 quadrants of the room: the northwest, southwest, northeast, and southeast quadrants. Where Garuda spawns really dictates how this phase goes. I'm going to let the phase play out, but let's recap the mechanics here. We know that a Wicked Wheel when awoken is a Wicked Wheel Dynamo combo. We know that Titan when awoken, when he does Landslide, he does the double instant cast Landslide in the lanes that weren't affected by the first Landslide. And we know that when Ifrit does his awoken Crimson Cyclones, he's going to leave behind a crossed dash in the lane that if he dashed intercardinally for the first dash, then that means on the cardinals there's going to be a cross dash afterwards. It's basically just opposite of what Ifrit was. So because Ifrit always spawns intercardinally in this phase, the ending of this phase is always going to end with a set of cardinal crossed dashes. So let's see how this plays out. Ignore what we're doing to this, because I'll explain afterwards. But watch the mechanics basically appear on screen. It's a lot to take in the first time you see it. So you had the Ifrit dash, you had the Titan Landslide, and you had the Garuda Wicked Wheel. Then you have the second Titan Landslide, and then Garuda flies away and does Feather Rain. I don't know if you caught it. Let's see if you can catch it on camera. It's going to be kind of difficult, but what Ultima is doing here is Ultima is going to be casting Cerulean Vent, which is basically a damaging AoE around him, in a proximity around him. So what that tells you is, because the phase ends with Ultima Weapon casting Cerulean Vent, it tells you that the quadrant that Ultima Weapon is in, you really don't want to be in the middle of at the end of this mechanic. So that's a big tell of where you need to go to solve this mechanic. So, like I mentioned, there's a couple different ways you can get through this. Some of them I'm more familiar with than others. I'm going to give sort of some. This is the one particular part of the fight where I'm least, I would say, experienced with in terms of the various strategies that you can do. The strategy that we implemented in our progression was just a complete cheese of the mechanic to save time. We actually found that the second set of Crimson Cyclone dashes, the ones that do the cross attack cardinally, for whatever reason, when you only take one of the dashes, it deals half the damage of a normal Crimson Cyclone, and because it's dealing half the damage, it's actually completely mitigatable. So you can actually just throw shields at this mechanic and just sit inside the final Crimson Cyclone and just absorb the Crimson Cyclone if you want. Completely cheese the mechanic. But let's ignore that for now and talk about some of the ways that teams are doing it where you can just dodge all the damage entirely. When to do that, we really need to talk about Titan's Landslides first and foremost. So Titan's Landslides, the first set of Landslides that go out, they're going to be targeting more or less the cardinals of the map, the first set. Because he's a little bit off center, it's not a perfect cardinal that he's targeting, but it's close enough for the purpose of our discussion. So because he's targeting the cardinals, that more or less means that the second set of landslides that he does afterwards from his awoken state is going to be targeting the intercardinals. So what you can do, and I'm just going to briefly run through how you can do this. The key to doing this is to identify the fact that the follow-up to Garuda's Wicked Wheel is the Dynamo, like we mentioned, and Dynamos are outrangeable. Watch Garuda cover the map here with her Wind Dynamo, and you can see that on the portion of the map opposite of Garuda, there's going to be a spot of the area untouched by her Dynamo. So you can it's hard to get a good shot of it. Let me try again. Let me try to get a good freeze frame here. It's really difficult. I don't know if the stream's even gonna pick this up. But there's a faint green line here, and this is the edge of her Dynamo. You can see that we're basically residing on the very edge of her outside her Dynamo. And this is a very simple way of handling the mechanic. There are safe zones in the middle of the map, but in my experience, and I would imagine most people's experience, they're kind of difficult to identify. I think I can confidently say that they are definitely more difficult than just outranging the Dynamo. Using the inner portion of the donut, I feel, is much more complicated than just using the outside portion and outranging it. That's my opinion. I would imagine I speak for a lot of people when I say that's their opinion as well. So most people, when they're approaching strategies for this mechanic, wanted to favor a movement that basically ended them on the outer ring of the Dynamo. If you wanted to end on the inner portion of the donut and do this mechanic near Garuda, you really need to start breaking down the direction that Garuda is facing and utilizing the back of her. You either utilize the directly behind her if Titan Landslides are going one way, or you use the back of her wings if Titan Landslides are going another way. I just feel like it's a lot more complicated if you do that. It's much easier if you outrange the Dynamo. And one of the ways, if you're not cheesing the mechanic, if you're not just shielding the Crimson Cyclone, one of the ways you can dodge the Crimson Cyclone easily, and this is a popular thing that I see on Twitter a lot these days, is there's actually these rune and hieroglyphics around the arena. And what you can do is you can go to one of the cardinals opposite of Garuda, far away from Garuda, identify these sort of runes near the position that you're at, wait for the first landslide to go out, and then because the second landslide is going to be going into the intercardinals, if you move into the center of these sets of runes right here, like right where my mouse is, right here, if you move right there, you're actually safe from the cardinal Crimson Cyclones that are going to be happening and the intercardinal landslides that are going to be coming from Titan. So a lot of teams are using this visual indicator of these runes around the edge of the arena and standing in the center of a set of runes on the nearest cardinal opposite of Garuda. Excuse me. Or you can just be really cheesy like us and just throw shields at it and just eat the Crimson Cyclone. Pick your poison. But that is sort of a brief summary of the Ultimate Predation phase. Because I more or less cheese the mechanic, I'm less experienced with the other strategies, but hopefully that outlines it enough for anybody who doesn't want to cheese it to go in there, and if you want to dodge everything, that outlines it enough for you to do so. I will mention that Garuda can spawn opposite of Ultima Weapon, which means if you're moving to a cardinal opposite of Garuda, then you're putting yourself in a cardinal that's near Ultima Weapon. The Cerulean vent that Ultima Weapon does not extend past the cardinal markers here. So you would want to be making sure that the set of runes and hieroglyphics that you choose are on the side that is not next to Ultima. It's on the side of the cardinal away from Ultima. Otherwise, you're going to be getting hit by the vent that Ultima casts. Whew, so Predation's a bit of a mouthful, a bit of a struggle to get through, but I think that probably summarizes it best I can. So after Ultimate Predation, which is sort of like a trio-esque phase, we're going to be entering what I call the first walking phase. This is basically referring to Ultimate Weapon returning to the center of the map and being targetable and attackable again. But just because the Primals have gone away does not mean they're gone. The Primals are shortly going to be back in a few seconds and dealing with all sorts of, throwing all sorts of bullshit at us, just like they will for the entire remainder of the fight. I'm going to let this phase play out first, and then sort of revisit it and break it down piece by piece. Just pay attention to what's happening on the screen right now. We've got eruptions on the screen right now. We've got Titan appearing off screen right now. Radiant Plumes are happening from Ifrit. There's Landslides shortly after the Radiant Plumes. I don't know if you noticed, but you might have also saw the Ultimate Weapon himself actually did a landslide. There's a tank debuff that's gone on the main target with threat. This is the ticking time bomb that explodes in 10 seconds. We have a homing laser casting. And that wraps up the phase. In all of that, there were tumults and an aerial blast from Gruta. So, and there were actually 2 sisters in the map. So there's actually a lot going on for being a phase that's not supposed to be all about mechanics. It's supposed to be like where you're supposed to get your damage in on Ultimate Weapon. And there's actually a lot of mechanics going on here. So let's break down what actually is happening here. Let me rewind. Okay, so we're exiting Ultimate Predation right now. We're entering the first walking phase. If you remember, the first thing that's going to happen is Ifrit's going to appear at 12 o'clock on the map, which is our A marker on the screen. I believe he's always going to appear at 12 o'clock. I can't say I ever saw a configuration where he did not appear at 12 o'clock, so I don't believe it's based on Ultima's position or anything. You will shortly see in a few moments that Titan's spawn location is actually based on Ultima's position. So Titan is entering the arena Ifrit is entering the arena right now. He's at the A marker off screen to the bottom of your screen right now. He's going to be sending eruptions on the 2 players farthest from Ifrit himself. Not farthest from Ultimate Weapon, it's key to note. The players farthest from Ifrit himself. So a pretty simple way of dealing with this is to pull Ultimate Weapon near Ifrit and have 2 players go completely opposite of Ifrit. So they'll be baiting the eruptions, moving around the arena in a controlled fashion, and eventually meeting up with us for the next set of mechanics. The next set of mechanics here is Ifrit's going to do a fire tether, which I actually forgot to mention in the earlier phase, but it's pretty similar to the fire tether that you're used to from Extreme. If you're far away, you get increasing stacks of damage down, and it's not something that you really want. So as long as your party is centralized here, the tether kind of solves itself. And it is pretty important that the party remains centralized here because of the upcoming next set of 3 mechanics. I actually paused it at the perfect frame because at this moment, once the eruptions are resolved and everyone is sort of reconvened, you can see Titan entering the arena. And what Titan's going to do is Titan's going to start prepping a landslide. And this landslide, the spawn location of Titan is very important for this landslide. I mentioned earlier that his location is based off of Ultimate's position. Titan is going to spawn on one of the intercardinals opposite of Ultimate Weapon. So that means if Ultimate Weapon is at 12 o'clock, Titan can spawn at either the southwest or southeast lanes of the map. It's just, to my knowledge, it's just complete 50-50 which lane he chooses. But the lane he chooses is important for doing this mechanic cleanly. Ifrit's going to end his set of mechanics with the Radiant Plumes around the arena right now. And while Titan is preparing his landslide, Ultimate Weapon himself is going to be casting landslide. So we have 2 sets of landslides plus a Radiant Plume combination here. And what you're going to do is you're going to wait on the edge of the Radiant Plumes because actually before Titan prepares the landslide, what Titan's doing firstly and foremost is he's spawning bombs in the center of the arena, and they're again moving clockwise, I believe. Because of that, you want to be on the very edge of the cubbies that these Radiant Plumes are making to not have a bomb spawn on you and die. Because remember, when these bombs spawn, when they drop down, they do a bury AoE that does a lot of damage and will kill any player hit by it. I think even kill a tank. I'm not sure. So you want to be tightly stacked on the edge of these plumes to dodge any berries coming down, and then move into the plumes as the plumes that go off, because we need to start preparing for landslide positions. We want to be moving away from the center of the map because the center of the map is really congested with berries right now. So the side of the map that Titan spawned on, in order to do this mechanic cleanly, you want to move back in a straight fashion directly in line with your 12 o'clock marker. The reason for this is we want to bait Ultima Weapon's Landslide directly north. Because what's going to happen is if you're baiting Ultima Weapon's Landslide north, Ultima Weapon's Landslide is a triple prong landslide. If you're baiting it north and Titan is shooting at the Cardinals from an angle, what's going to happen is the side of the map that Titan is on is inherently going to be a safe zone from this landslide combo. And let's let Ultima Weapon's Landslide play out so you can see what I'm actually talking about. You can see Titan's Landslide coming this way. Ultima Weapon's Landslide is going to go in a three-pronged fashion this way. So you have this area of the map kind of fucked by the Titan's Landslide, but that has inherently opened up this safety zone right here for a spot that's safe from both sets of landslides. So that's the reason that the side that Titan spawns on is very important if you want to do this mechanic cleanly. Worth reminding everyone that all of these mechanics are Awaken Mechanics, so Titan's Landslide, because he shoots one landslide, is going to shoot a second landslide in the lanes that he did not shoot before. So there's the instant cast second landslide. And at this point, we're preparing for the final set of mechanics of this walking phase. We need to start preparing threat here, because what's going to happen is he's going to put that Aether Bomb on the player with highest threat. And then shortly thereafter, we're going to have Garuda enter the fray. So, one of the things that I found simplest here, because Garuda has entered the map, Garuda's going to be casting Aerial Blast, and also her sisters, I don't know if you can see them on camera, but Trada and Saparna have spawned on the west and east side of the map, and they're going to be doing Wicked Wheels. However, because they're non-awoken in their state, you know, we never actually awoken the sisters themselves. The Wicked Wheels are not Wicked Wheel Dynamos, they're just regular Wicked Wheel Iron Chariots, so we don't have to really worry. If you're doing this mechanic centralized north at 12 o'clock, you don't really need to even care about the sisters on the side of the map. So it's really convenient to do everything at 12 o'clock right now. But what the winged bitch that you do need to worry about right now is Garuda, because Garuda is going to be doing Aerial Blast, which is a lot of damage. And while the Aerial Blast is going on, there are two tank mechanics that are happening. One of them of more importance than the other. And that's the Ticking Time Bomb, the Aether Bomb, which I, for the life of me, can't remember the name of. But this bomb, remember, goes on the highest threat of Ultima Weapon, and after 10 seconds, it's going to explode. It is party soakable, and therefore you can split the damage to make it livable without any CBs. However, the timing of explosion pretty much lines up concurrently with the Aerial Blast from Garuda, so I find it to be a lot of damage. My personal feelings on this set of mechanics right here is that this is one of the premier moments for a tank invulnerability, and the reasoning for that is because you can utilize a tank invuln such as Hallowed or Living Dead, specifically those two. I wouldn't mess with Holmgang here, but specifically Hallowed or Living Dead. They're long enough duration to where they can catch not only the Aether Bomb, but if you do a tank swap after the bomb is applied, the player who has the bomb can become second on threat and then also receive the homing missile follow-up. So you're centralizing both tank mechanics on one tank and invulning both of them. And the importance of that is you're invulning the bomb and not requiring a party soak of the bomb during the Aerial Blast. And I think that that's really important. It's possible that the reasoning, and I think it's not only possible, it's also probable that the reasoning that we felt that this damage was so heavy on our party at this moment with the bomb and the Aerial Blast is because we did cheese predation and we did throw a lot of our mitigation tools at predation. We're a little bit light on party mitigation tools at this moment because of that. So I think what I would say is that if you are a group that is going to cheese predation, I would recommend using a tank invuln here because the Aerial Blast Aether Bomb combo is a little much for where your party is going to be at right now. So the sisters on the sides of the map, they did their wicked wheels and then they jump up, which signifies anytime a Garuda sister or Garuda herself jumps up, she's going to leave behind feather rains. So we need to move. While we're moving, I believe, it's actually a Mistral Shriek. I'm sorry, I've been calling it Aerial Blast, but it's a Mistral Shriek that's actually what Garuda's channeling. But it's the same thing. It's just, it's radio-y damage. So Garuda has done her big raid buster. The homing laser is going on the player with second highest threat. We've set it up so that is our hollow ground tank. Garuda is off the map, so Garuda is leaving behind her sets of feather rain, so we're moving again. And that concludes the walking phase. And we are now entering what I would call the second set of trios. However, I'm really reluctant to call these trios. They're ultimate phases, but I don't really have a great name for these phases yet. But it's Predation, Annihilation, and Suppression. I'm less inclined to call these trios because Annihilation is unique compared to a trio in that the boss is completely targetable for the entire duration of the phase. So it's not just a mechanical dance. You need to be pushing damage in this upcoming phase. Before I start with this phase, I'm definitely going to take a sip of water because I've been talking 90 miles a minute. Ugh. And before we get into this phase, I want to highlight the importance of this phase. In my opinion, this is one of the most critical moments of progression. A lot of teams got walled by Suppression. However, I would put Annihilation a higher importance in Suppression in the grand scheme of progression. The phase of Annihilation has the most bearing on the remainder of the fight. It is so important, and one of the things that I haven't even discussed with the Ultimate Weapon yet is, and it's probably a good time to do so, is I don't know if you guys have noticed while we've been discussing things, but during the Ultimate Weapon phases, there's an Aether Gauge on the screen. And I'll briefly outline what this Aether Gauge means and what it's doing. The Aether Gauge fills up naturally as the fight goes on. When he does certain mechanics, he gains a specific amount of Aether Gauge naturally. I believe it's 4 for Predation, 8 for getting to Annihilation. Something I'm not going to remember off the top of my head. I'm not even going to try and embarrass myself. But it gains a specific static amount of Aether Gauge throughout the fight. In addition to the static amount of gauge that he's gaining, the other ways that the bar fills up is by dying or by doing a certain mechanic in the upcoming Annihilation phase here. Every time you die on Ultimate Weapon, he gains 4 Aether. Without giving too much away, I want to emphasize that our goal going through the remainder of Ultimate Weapon's phases is to keep the Aether Gauge as low as feasibly possible. There is a minimum amount of Aether required to actually complete this fight, and I want to say, I'm not going to remember off the top of my head. I know that in this VOD, the minimum amount required is going to be 1 less than we're going to show. However, I will later point out that the difference between having 1 less or 1 more is actually completely inconsequential, and it ends up being that they're the exact same thing. But the point that I'm driving home is you want to keep the Aether Gauge as limited as possible, and you will see why when we get to the end of the fight. However, just know that for now, we want to avoid deaths, and we want to minimize as much as possible our interaction with an upcoming mechanic in this next phase. So I mentioned that Annihilation was probably one of the most critical points in progression in my eyes, and I'll sort of outline why that is before I continue. A lot of teams, ours included, in order to get through Annihilation while learning, did not really focus on their uptime, and I'm going to let some of the intro of the phase play out, probably the first 10 seconds of the phase play out, because I want you guys to see a specific mechanic. So this is the beginning of Annihilation. Hopefully you can see it on screen. His camera's turned. Okay, you can see it right there. Alright. What's happening in Annihilation is While there's obviously a bunch of mechanics happening on screen, but the key concept of this phase is actually the thing you see directly in front of you at the top of the screen. That green orb. That is the focal point of this phase, and everything about this phase revolves around that green orb right there. There are 4 green orbs in total, and they are so critical to the remainder of this fight. Incredibly critical to the remainder of this fight. I cannot emphasize that enough. And one of the reasons this was a big, huge moment in progression is because I would say a raider's first intuition when they see an orb that explodes and does damage is to avoid that mechanic, avoid getting hit by that explosion. So I can give you, I can speak from personal experience. When we were designing a strategy to get through this phase cleanly, we actually had a very, very clean strategy that cost us a bit of uptime to do, but completely avoided all 4 orbs entirely. And when executed, it was so clean. Nobody took any orb damage, and it was fantastic. However, as the fight goes on, you realize that that's the improper way of doing the phase. And I don't want to explain just yet because it'll ruin the fun. But you actually want to go through this phase getting hit by those green orbs. And I promise I will explain why later, but it is going to be so much more fun revealing to you guys later why that is at a later point. But a lot of teams, when they initially progged through this phase, they avoided the green orbs, and they were totally blindsided later on when they realized they could not do that. So I know, speaking for us personally, when we realized that, we had to go back and reprog this entire phase, and that was a nightmare, honestly. Well, that we kind of got stonewalled there for a while, to be honest, because the reprogression we had to do here was such like a stark difference to what we were used to doing. So yeah, just a really key moment in progression. So let's rewind back to the Annihilation intro here and sort of talk about what's going on. Let's go even farther back. So at the beginning of Annihilation, Ultimate Weapon is going to spawn at the 12 o'clock position, which is noted by our A marker here. It was pretty easy to see that he's going to open with a set of 3 weighted lands. What you can't see off camera right now is behind us at the southwest and southeast positions are Ifrit and Titan. And then at the directly 6 o'clock position right behind us is Garuda. So behind us you have all 3 primals adjacent next to each other at the southwest, south, and southeast positions. They're going to be doing a bunch of mechanics that need to be done, some as a group and some not. Let's walk through what those mechanics are. We know that Titan's going to be opening with weighted lands. If you can see, it's a little bit difficult to see. It's red on brown. Let's see if I can get a shot of it. You can kind of see it. I mean, you can see the debuff here, but in the middle of these weighted lands, there's a fireball marker from Ifrit. And if you remember the fireball marker from phase 1, or rather phase 2 of the fight, it's a stack mechanic where the amount of people hit by it reduces the duration of the debuff. So the debuff is a big dot, and if you leave it on for a long time, it's life-threatening. So you want as many people stacked for this as possible. If you can, it's difficult to see. Let's see if I can get a better shot of it. But at the timing of the second weighted land, from Garuda's 6 o'clock position, you see this green tether. Now, if you think back to Garuda's phase 1, what does this green tether mean? This green tether is a meso high, and this takes us back. So this goes back to Garuda phase 1. This is what all those thermal lows were preparing for. Garuda, in these later stages of the fight, is going to be doing meso high tethers, and if you remember from phase 1, the way you counter a meso high tether is to throw a player with a thermal low stack at it. You only need 1, and every stack that you cleanse deals a large amount of super cyclone damage. 1 stack only deals about 6,000 damage, so it's very workable. You really don't want to be dealing with more than 1 stacks here. So we've saved players with stacks, and I believe we're going to throw our Bard at this one specifically. So he's going to detach from the group shortly after soaking the fireball with us. And he's going to take the Meso High Tether south to Garuda and resolve the Meso High Tether there, and then re-meet up with us on the north side of the map to resolve the rest of the mechanics. So our Bard will move south with the Meso High Tether. The final weight of the land comes out, and the party is going to move north, dodging the green orb. I, as a tank, am going to stay behind and soak that green orb, and that'll make, like I said, My soaking of that green orb there will make sense at a later stage in the fight. It's going to ruin the fun if I tell you now. But everyone here is going to move to the north side of the map to start resolving some of the mechanics you're going to be following up these weighted lands. You can see in a few seconds here that after the fireball that Ifrit does, Ifrit picks one of the two healers to do a Searing Wind. And it's the same Searing Wind that you're used to. It's going to target a healer, and that healer is just going to need to move away from the party. So what we're going to do, in order to keep uptime in the boss, because uptime in the boss is very important right now, is we're going to have everyone, the party members without Searing Wind, up north attacking Ultima, and the healer with Searing Wind goes south, basically swapping positions with the ranged player who had Meso High back there. The Meso High tether at this point has resolved by the time Searing Wind goes out, so that player is free to leave that quadrant and return to the party, and the Searing Wind is able to leave the party and go to their own quadrant down here. So at this point, we have Ifrit on the map. Titan has left momentarily, but he'll be back. To rest assured, Titan will be back. Ifrit, you can see here. Let's see if I can get a good shot of it. Ifrit's doing his crouch stance, and what that means, whenever you see the Ifrit crouch stance, you know that an Ifrit dive is happening. If you are paying close attention, you'll notice that Ifrit is on an intercardinal, which means his dive is going to be going across an intercardinal lane, which means that a large safe zone is on the other intercardinal lane that Ifrit is not charging through. We'll be utilizing that to our advantage. Titan has returned to the map in the intercardinal lane adjacent to Ifrit to the south. And what Titan is going to do is Titan's going to do a landslide. These landslides, I believe, are going to target I want to say the intercardinals first. Yes. So Ifrit's going to charge one lane of intercardinal, and Titan's going to landslide all of the remaining 3 intercardinals. And I mentioned earlier that because Ifrit is charging this intercardinal, the largest safe zone right now from an Ifrit charge is this quadrant up here at this intercardinal. And because Ifrit is awoken, you can remember that his awoken mechanic for his charge is that after he charges, if he charged intercardinally, he's going to do a cross dive on the cardinal lanes. So we know that because he's always charging intercardinally, we want to end this movement not in a cardinal lane. So we will move into a safe intercardinal lane opposite of Titan as the party. The healer with Searing Wind actually has an easy job in that after Ifrit charges, they can just move directly into where Ifrit charged from. We found that to be much easier than dodging into the Titan side of things. When you're dealing with the Titan side of things, it gets a little bit cramped dodging on the landslides. So I would recommend for any player acting on this side of the map to just dodge into the lane that Ifrit is charging from. You'll see Muni do that just here. The first landslide goes out. It is an awoken landslide, which means we're going to get an instant cast landslide that's going to be affecting the cardinals next. So the party has moved in the intercardinal lane into the previous landslide to be safe. Meanwhile, myself as a tank, I'm off doing my own thing, Rogue, and we mentioned that I'm taking orbs, so I want to make sure that I don't cleave the party with the orbs. So I'm going to go in a direction opposite of the party and move in and take this orb solo. There are a total of 4 orbs. 3 of them I want to take solo, and the 4th one I want to double soak with my co-tank. So we saw the Awoken Landside, we saw the Awoken Ifrit charge, and we now see the 3rd orb explode, and we see Garuda doing a 2nd Meso High Tether. What is very convenient is, as long as you arrange your thermal load debuffs properly, buffs I should say rather, as long as you arrange those buffs properly and have the right people taking the right Meso Highs at the right time, you can actually have the healer that's already separated for Searing Wind take this Meso High. So we've orchestrated it so that Muni has a thermal load debuff here so that he can take this tether. He's already on the side of the map away from the party. He can take the tether away from the party and resolve the mechanic away from us. I would strongly recommend that you just you do something if you're progging this fight. Do something similar to this. It makes this so much easier. Excuse me. So after the Meso High revolves, Garuda's job is done, so Garuda flies away, and anytime Garuda flies away, we know that there's Feather Rain. That ends the Annihilation phase. Worth noting that Searing Wind is still ticking. There's one more tick after the Annihilation phase, so don't just run to your Searing Wind healer. One more tick right here. That's the final tick. Okay, so we've entered the second quote-unquote walking phase. This phase, our goal here is to deal with some of the mechanics that Ultimate Weapon is going to be throwing at us while also pushing him to below 50%. When the boss is pushed to 50%, he auto-phases into his final mechanical dance, Ultimate Suppression. This is a good period of burn. There's not a lot going on here. There's going to be a series of Tank Busters and Vulcan Bursts. And the Vulcan Bursts, they don't deal a large amount of damage, and they knock you back into the wall and into the Eye of the Storms here. So they're very easy to pre-shield and completely zero out, and therefore stop the knockback. So I don't think I've seen any team not try to zero them. It seems to be very intuitive and easy to do. I think the hardest part of zeroing out this mechanic is the Scholar getting the timing of Adloing the tanks receiving the Tank Busters to make sure that they have a shield going into the Vulcan Bursts, because some of the Vulcan Bursts happen right after Tank Busters. So your Scholar will need to get the Adlo timing for that, but I think it's one or two tries to successfully do that. So the first thing that Ultima Weapon opens up with here is the homing lasers, which if you recall from earlier, the homing lasers always affect the player with the second highest threat, where we've orchestrated it so that it's going to be on our Paladin here. After the homing lasers, we're going to see a bunch of Radiant Plumes from Ifrit. And directly after these Radiant Plumes, as the main tank is running back in, the main tank is going to receive a Diffractal Laser, I believe it's called. It's a tank buster that cleaves with no cast bar that you just need to mitigate. Diffractive Laser it might be called. But it's the beam from his other iterations. Shortly after that, we have the first Vulcan Burst. So that was an example of a Tank Buster into a Vulcan Burst. So the main tank takes damage. He needs an Adlo. Everyone else is already prepared with Sucker and or Shake It Off and or Veil. The Vulcan Burst gets zeroed out, so nobody gets knocked back. After the first Vulcan Burst, we have a second Homing Laser. And directly after this Homing Laser is a second Vulcan Burst. So again, tank takes damage, tank needs to be shielded. At this point in time, if you've been caring about your DPS and pushing damage, you should be preparing for a phase into Ultimate Suppression. I'll just outline what happens if you don't make the 50% push. If you don't make the 50% push, I believe he phases naturally. It goes the homing missile that you saw there into Vulcan Burst, into Laser Tank Buster on the main tank, into phase. So at this point in the fight, every bit of damage on Ultima is of the utmost importance. It is so important that you do as much damage as you can to him, because the remainder of this fight, once he comes back targetable, is a full burn. The Aether Gauge is going to start coming into play here pretty soon. You'll notice that we entered Annihilation with 20 and we exited with 9. So Ultimate Suppression was a wall for many teams. I think Ultimate Suppression, I mentioned earlier that Predation was probably the least intuitive. I think in terms of execution, Suppression was probably the most difficult. Certainly the most difficult to map out, and this is probably one of the best times to utilize the Draw app. I'm gonna let the Suppression play out, but you guys can see. I'll give you a sneak peek. Suppression took us many trial and errors. We tried many different strategies for suppression, and these are just an example of some of them. This is actually a second whiteboard. We actually ran out of room on our previous whiteboard, so I can zoom this thing all the way out. You can imagine like what running out of room looks like. So yeah, a lot of time went into ultimate suppression, and these diagrams will be really useful for analyzing what's actually going on in the phase. But I'm gonna let ultimate suppression play out first, and then we'll discuss sort of what's going on. It's a very fast-paced phase. Compared to the rest of the fight, I would say this is a very fast-paced phase. It almost felt too fast. When we were doing it, we kept feeling like, are we doing this wrong? This feels too fast. I guess that's just how Ultimate is, I guess, at some points. It was just odd that compared to the rest of the phases, this phase operated at a pace that was so much more elevated. So the tank purge here is the ending of the suppression dance. So before we continue on, I want to go back and discuss everything that was happening here. So let's go back to the suppression cast. So where to begin? There are a few things to note about suppression. First and foremost, I would like to mention that this phase is designed with the intent that all 8 players are doing something. All 8 players have a role in this phase. The way that I'm going to illustrate it, only 7 players really have a role. You can actually have your tanks, one of your tanks kind of be AFK. And it honestly makes mapping and orchestrating the phase a little bit simpler. It's not like the other way to do it is any super difficult, any super level of difficulty, but it does remove one bit of thought from the phase, and I'll outline that when we get to it. But what's happening with this phase is at the start of the phase, 3 players are going to get eruptions, and the eruptions they're going to get are going to come out in sets of 4. In that the 3 players that get eruptions are going to drop 1 eruption, a second eruption, a 3rd eruption, and a 4th eruption. One of those 3 players at the time of the 2nd eruption is going to be targeted by a jail. And that is critical for understanding this mechanic. Now, I wouldn't say understanding this mechanic. It's critical for doing this mechanic cleanly. And also understanding the mechanic. Players who did not receive eruptions and are not the target of jail, 2 of them are going to be targeted by Mistral Songs. If you remember from Phase 1 of Garuda, Mistral Songs are the markers that Tirada and Suparna put on players, and it's a cone attack that the player first, I don't want to call it a wild charge. It's not the right term. But the player first hit by Mistral Song soaks the majority of the damage, and then players behind that player take a largely reduced amount of damage. And the first player hit by the Mistral Song leaves behind the giant Cyclone Tornado. Because there's 2 Mistral Songs and there's 2 sisters, it's time to use the drop a little bit. This is the layout of the phase. The spawn locations, this is one of the few phases where the spawn locations of the primals and Ultimate Weapon are completely static. The green markers I have here are the spawn locations of Tirada and Suparna. You can probably see them as soon as the phase begins. I'll pause it right when the phase begins so you can see them. Okay, so you have Garuda here. You have either Tirada or Suparna here. I don't know who's who. And you have Tirada or Suparna here. To my knowledge, there's no way to distinguish the sisters between themselves. I could be wrong, but I didn't really see one. I don't think it's actually very important, so it's kind of moot. But the sisters are spawning in a line with Garuda, and that's important for how this phase is gonna resolve. So if we imagine that the green circles here are the sisters, you have Garuda at the northwest position, Ultima Weapon at the northeast position, Ifrit at the southeast position, and Titan at the southwest position. the minstrel songs themselves are coming from these two sisters, Trot and Zaparna. Now, how should I explain this cleanly? Imagine for a moment some of the different ways you can resolve some of these minstrel songs. Well, you could have a situation where you put the minstrel songs, in the center here, and then you have maybe, one tank here and one tank here, and that's a completely logical conclusion to come to. I think everyone that's their initial thought when you see this mechanic. It doesn't really matter which marker corresponds to which sister at this point. If this marker here is coming from this sister, it doesn't matter. The song is still going to be passing through this tank first. If this sister is corresponding to this marker right here, the marker is still going to be passing through that tank first. So the marker position, who has which marker is irrelevant, as long as you just put the tanks in front of where the markers are going. And that's a completely logical and fine conclusion. However, what you'll see as the video plays out, I hope that you can see it from this POV. If not, I may actually open a second POV. Perfect. Okay, the Garuda, what Garuda is doing is Garuda is doing her own variation of minstrel song, except it's a visible minstrel song, and it's a giant fucking cone. And use this 2 as a reference marker. Look at this 2. This cone is covering this 2, which means if you go back to our draw app, if this is our 2, this guy right here is fucked. So we know that this cone is baitable. I will mention this cone is baitable, but it is not baitable in enough of a way that you can get the cone off of targeting 2. No matter what, if you're right next to Garuda or not right next to Garuda, you cannot get the cone to not touch 2. The arc of the cone is too wide. I want to say that my opinion of the cone in this phase is a complete waste of time. I just want to let you guys know that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Garuda cone, and I've spoken to a couple people about this post-prog, but the interaction of the Garuda cone and the fact that you can bait the Garuda cone into different angles and stuff is such a waste of time. This phase is much, I feel, just more intuitive if you just ignore the cone's existence and make sure that you don't step into the cone. That's all I'm going to say about the cone. But what the cone tells us is there's really not enough. Watch the timeline. So the minstrel songs have just gone out. You can see the minstrel songs on your screen. We can imagine that if we were doing the previous tank positioning, a tank would be where Ifrit Edgy is right now. Tell me if you think there's enough time for Ifrit Edgy to get out. Spoiler, there's really not. Maybe you can get lucky and get out, but I know that I tried it twice and I got hit both times. So I don't recommend this. This, I think, is a bad idea. And I think most people will agree with me. So we know that we don't like that. Well, if you start thinking about the cone, I would say, let's get an accurate depiction. Let's get an accurate picture of that cone. Let's rewind a couple seconds. So the cone it's going a little bit past the cardinals. It's not quite reaching the next intercardinal. So we'll say the cone is doing something like this. Basically like that. So we know that this area is bad. We don't want to be there right now. We don't want to be there until that cone is gone. So because the minstrel song markers are resolved before the cone, we know we want to be elsewhere. One other arrangement of the markers that may or may not be intuitive was this idea, where you had say you had a marker here. One thing I think that was important when designing these strategies, I personally, and I don't know if it's been mentioned in chat, but I could not discern which sister was doing which marker, and I may be incorrect, but to my knowledge, it's indiscernible. So you come up with a strategy that accounts for both scenarios of one sister having a marker or the other sister having a marker. And I hope I'm not incorrect in that, but I don't believe that it's discernible which sister is doing which marker. So one set of tank positioning that may be logical is having one marker there, one marker here, and then having a tank here or here. Hopefully the stream picks this up. Let me actually verify that this is appearing. Yeah, this is appearing pretty good. And what this means is, I can't click. What this means is that even if this marker right here, if it's coming from this sister, it's still passing through that tank. If it's coming from this sister, it's still passing through that tank. So either scenario, you're fine. And the same goes for this marker right here. So you've eliminated any confusion about which sister is shooting which marker, and it really doesn't matter. This is a completely fine and solid way of doing the mechanic. There's nothing wrong with this. It is foolproof and very strong. I believe Entropy, the World First team, actually did something similar to this, if not exactly this. The strategy that we used is a little bit modified version of this, but it is a completely fine way of doing it. The only thing that you have to orchestrate if you're doing this is I mentioned that the markers come out around the second eruption. You will have to have a system, and the system is honestly not very complicated, but you will have to have a system that that basically has one player know that they're going to the left tank and the other player know that they're going to the right tank. Let's see. If there is a way to discern which target the markers are on, which I'm not sure if there is, Cleese is saying in chat that it's possible that one target's a healer and one target's DPS. I feel like I disproved that during progression. However, I'm not going to say for certain. I'm going to act under the premise that that's not the case, and if I'm wrong, then someone can correct me later. What if that is not the case and it is indiscernible which role is going to receive which marker? The easiest way that I can recommend doing this is you want to start out fanned out as a party of 6 or 7 along the wall by Garuda. This is your 6 party members right here, and then maybe you have a 7th tank. If you just want to do the 6 party members and then you have your 2 tanks idling over here, that's completely fine. Your tanks are not being targeted by any mechanics, so they can sit out here. But one probably cool way of doing this is you could have the eruptions go out, the players begin to move inward, and as the players with markers get chosen, the markers over their head, the marker that appears on the rightmost side of your party, say say if it's like right here, and maybe say the other marker is like this player over here, this player would know because he's the rightmost player, he would be going to that tank, and this player right here would know that because he's the leftmost marker, he would be going to this tank. So assuming that the markers are not role-based and you cannot discern who they're going to target, that would be how I would do the mechanic. The way that I'm going to outline next completely removes any concern over that or any concern over who the markers are even targeting, and is therefore why I never really bothered to verify. Is this mechanic is actually entirely and easily solo tankable. So what you can actually do, let me erase some of this here. Instead of splitting your tanks 1 and 1 and splitting the markers 1 and 1, you can honestly just send both markers. You can honestly just send both markers to the same tank south, and with like 1 cooldown, maybe 2, like tank stance plus 1 cooldown, this tank can take both hits of Mr. Song pretty easily. Paladin is pretty strong at it. If you don't care about your POA, which you don't really necessarily need POA for other moments of this fight, it helps, but you don't really need it. If you don't actually care about your POA, this is actually a really easy POA. The benefit of POA here is you get the guaranteed block on both hits. The issue with Sheltron here is that Sheltron is only going to block 1 of the Missile Song hits, but POA gives you a guaranteed block on both of them. I thought this was a cool POA moment, plus shield health. I believe a Dark Knight can probably do this even easier. The one tank that I would not recommend doing this on is a Warrior. A Warrior is going to have to commit a number of cooldowns here to do this as effectively as a Paladin or a Dark Knight. But the reason that I like this idea is what this does is, you remember the Mr. Song, they leave behind the giant cyclones for the first player they hit. Not only does this free up one of the tanks to kind of do whatever he wants, this also leaves behind, the giant cyclones centralized in the same exact area. So you've freed up all this extra real estate up here for all sorts of fun and games. So I'm a big proponent of the solo tank method for this, but both strategies work just fine, and I would recommend both for anyone starting this phase. So we've talked a lot about the Mr. Song markers, and I'm sorry if the suppression is taking a long time, but there's so much going on in this phase that you really have to break it down piece by piece. I want to leave behind the starting positions of players here. In my opinion, the best starting position is lining up along the wall of Garuda. I think most teams will agree with me. Because we did the solo tank method, you can actually have your tank who's not doing anything. You can actually have him stand on Garuda and just run with the party. We talked about the 3 players who get eruptions. One of the three eruptions gets a jail. The 2 players who didn't get eruptions get Mr. Song markers. We have 2 tanks who are not targeted by anything. 3 plus 2 plus 2 leaves us with 7. There are 8 party members in a party, to nobody's shock. There is a final mechanic to this dance, and that mechanic is Light Pillar, cast from our good buddy Ultima Weapon right here. And if you're familiar with Proto Ultima, I believe, I've actually never done Proto Ultima, but I was told that this is a mechanic from Proto Ultima. What Light Pillar is it's basically it's a chasing mechanic with a beam of light that just chases the target that it chooses, and you just have to move away from it as it's chasing you. The player who is not targeted by any other mechanic is the player who Ultima chooses for Light Pillar. What's going to happen, and I'm gonna let these mechanics play out one more time before we do our final breakdown of the phase. What's going to happen is you're going to see a bunch of mechanics resolve at the same time, and that specific time is the 4th eruption. It feels like nearly everything in this damn phase happens at the 4th eruption. So let's count eruptions here. 1, 2. You see the Mr. Song markers were chosen before the 2nd eruption. The jail is chosen by the 2nd eruption. 3, 4. At the 4th eruption is when everything starts happening. Mr. Songs go out. The jail gets fettered, which is the stun. It's worth noting that the jail gets fettered at a point before the 4th eruption explodes. The best place for the jail, undisputably, I will argue it to the grave, the best place for the jail is to plop your ass in the dead center of that 4th eruption. You'll see why in a moment. But everything is happening right now at this 4th eruption. Mr. Songs have gone out. The jail is being fettered. As soon as you move out from the 4th eruption, the sisters who just did their Mr. Songs are going to leave the map and therefore leave behind feather rains at your current location. So you need to keep moving. Garuda has just done her Mr. Song. She's going to jump away. She drops her feather rain, so you need to keep moving. Meanwhile, you have an Awoken jail that needs to be burst down quickly before Granite Impact finishes. The giant cyclone was left behind shortly after the 4th eruption. Every fucking thing in the world is happening at this 4th eruption. And you need to do the movement in a way that frees up your jail so that you can dogpile the jail as a team and burn the shit out of it. This jail burn is not something to take lightly. It is something you need to commit to, and your strategy needs to allow you good uptime. And the only way a strategy allows you good uptime is 2 things. 3 things. 1, it's not covered in a cyclone. 2, it's not covered in feather rains. And 3, it's not covered by your Light Pillar. So while this jail is being dogpiled, the Light Pillar was off doing his own thing on the other side of the map. Presumably, the Light Pillar probably moved into where the green cone was and is doing it in the dead zone of the green cone. And as the Light Pillar is finishing, only then is he returning to the jail to help the team. Everyone else without Light Pillar should have converged at this point to the jail and be burning the jail. This is a fast granted impact cast. This jail has to be broken quickly. If you do not kill this in time, this is an auto wipe. Meanwhile, during that jail burn, Ultimate Weapon is casting aetherochemical lasers, which are a mechanic, I believe, from the hard mode version of Ultima, where he does a graphic on the ground and lines the ground with the graphic, and then shortly afterwards the graphic explodes. Excuse me. Oh, I didn't even get to talk about. God, I missed one Garuda mechanic that I'll return to in a second. Partly because the mechanic kind of solves itself, but I do need to highlight it. And once you've sort of killed that jail, you've gotten past what I call like the first half of suppression, and you have like a 3-second breather here to catch your breath from that quick movement. And before we continue the second half of suppression, I want to retreat a little bit and talk about one of the Garuda mechanics that I missed speaking about, and it's gonna be a little bit difficult to see it on the VOD. Unfortunately, let me try to find a. Oh, there it was, right there, actually. Yeah, there it is. Okay. I mentioned at the very beginning of this discussion that there was an unintended method, confirmed by the devs, of our ability to not have to awaken Garuda early in her phase, and therefore we get to skip a lot of Garuda's awoken mechanics. One of the awoken mechanics that you can skip by awakening Garuda at the end of her phase is this little guy right here. Let's see if I can get a better shot of it. You really can't. So what this is right here is this is actually a small feather called a feather lance. And what's happening in this phase is there are 4 feather lances spawned on the perimeter of the fight. And what they're going to do, and I might be able to catch it in motion, but what they're going to do is they're going to start rotating, I want to say clockwise around the arena. And if you touch one, they do a large radius AoE explosion that basically kills anybody that isn't a tank. At first glance, because tanks survived, a lot of teams initially thought that in order to get the feather lances off the map to sort of free up real estate, because they're really annoying. These feather lances are really annoying. They're in the way. They basically force you off the edges of the walls. This is one reason why people are running their eruptions through center and centralizing their eruptions there as opposed to using the walls. At the time of the 4th eruption, in between the 3rd and the 4th eruption, these feather lances appear, and you can't be actually. I think they appear a little bit before that, but they become active at the time of in between the 3rd and 4th eruption. I believe that's true. But you can't be messing around with the perimeters of the arena while these feather lances are out. What's going to happen in the second half of suppression, this is why I wanted to talk about it, is if left unchecked, at the end of suppression, these feathers are going to converge on a target, and remember, when they hit a target, they explode and do a large radius AoE. And anybody hit by that AoE is dead. Because of that, you have to get the feather lances cleared off the map. Otherwise, somebody is guaranteed to die. At first thought, most people thought, okay, a tank can live these feather lances. Maybe this is a tank soak. Maybe it's actually designed to have one tank be taking both Mistral Songs, and maybe the other tank is supposed to bait Garuda's cone to the side, and then his job is freed from Mistral Songs to be able to go and soak feathers. That was my thought process for a little bit of a while, at the early stages of progression. What you'll end up finding is that's actually not the case at all. Like at all. It's not a tank mechanic at all. And I'm gonna let the rest of the phase play out before I say how the feather lance is actually solved. But I wanted to highlight what they were before we continued. So we're coming from the jail burn here. We're throwing everything we had at it. Going into the suppression phase, it's really important that you build up meter. Your ninja has Ninki. Your warrior has preferably if you're running a warrior, this is like 100 gauge plus infuriate, so that you can get 2 Felcleaves and an upheaval and even an onslaught in it. You're going to get about 2 GCDs on this jail max because you're having to dodge the feather rains. So prep as much gauge and OGCDs as you can to burn down this jail quickly. Some classes are better at it than others. So once the jail is solved, the aetherochemical lasers are going. Ugh, the aetherochemical lasers are going out, and the directions of lanes that Ultima chooses for them, I believe, are the. Ooh, I believe he shoots the intercardinals, and the specific intercardinal that he shoots, I believe, is entirely random. We didn't find any rhyme or reason to it. We even saw him shoot the same lane twice in a row, so it just seems random. And the importance of that is that while this is going on, Titan is going to return to the arena and do an Awaken Landslide. You can see Ifrit come in right behind us. Ifrit is going to come back and prepare a Fireball. And this Fireball is going to happen concurrently with a Laser plus Titan Landslide combo. Also, hopefully you can see it off screen, but Garuda is going to come back and shoot out a Meso High Tether, and this is the final Meso High Tether of the fight, and probably one of the most important ones. Yes, you can see it perfectly. So the Meso High Tether is coming from Garuda. All the primals are in their static positions. So let's return to our app here. We have one tether coming from Garuda like this. You have landslides, going through the map from Titan. You have lasers coming from Ultima, and you have a fireball from Ifrit. So your goal here is to end in the safe zone of the first landslide before the second landslide goes out to soak your fireball. It is worth noting that the only the players who cannot be targeted by fireball are the tanks. So the perfect player to take the tether here easily is a tank. A tank is never going to be targeted by fireball here, and therefore can be the player outside the stack. So this is a very important thing to note, because if you want to do this, you need to orchestrate your thermal lows from the earlier phase of Garuda in a manner such that it leaves one stack of thermal low on at least one of your tanks going into this final phase. So the tank with thermal low will take the Meso High out. He'll move into his own safe zone away from the party. The party will find a safe zone in the Titan landslide, absorb the fireball damage, dodge the second landslide naturally, and we're going to enter one final set of movements here. The Meso High Tether is resolved by the tank over there. Garuda has just done her final mechanic, which means she's going to jump away and do a Feather Rain. You move for the Feather Rain, and the final mechanic of suppression is Ultima is channeling Tank Purge. You can see it right here. This does a lot of damage, so you need to top up from the Fireball while moving for the Feather Rain. You get through this with 8 out of 8 alive, and you have completed suppression. We are now entering the final phase. Everything from this point onward is a fucking burn. Burn the shit out of the boss. It is a race to the finish. It is either you or him. There is one final set of new mechanics that you have to deal with in order to get to the end of the fight. There's only one new mechanic remaining. Ultima comes back and starts channeling Ultima, just like his previous Ultima that he opened his phase with. This one gets Tankopied. At this point in time, at this moment in time, this is when the Aether Gauge finally comes into play. I believe because we have 37 here and we had one more than the absolute minimum, it looks like the minimum Aether Gauge that you can enter this phase with is 36. However, the difference between 36 and 37 is actually nothing. It's actually the exact same thing, and you'll see that at the end of the fight. What is going to happen here is very, very interesting. This is probably one of the most unintuitive, in my eyes, interactions in the fight, and definitely one of the coolest. You couldn't see it in the earlier phase, but remember what I spoke about Annihilation. Annihilation was critical to this fight. It was the cornerstone of the remainder of the fight, is how you do Annihilation. And unfortunately, you could not see it. But when a player takes a green orb in Annihilation, I said I wanted to save the surprise for the end. When a player takes a green orb in Annihilation, there is a purple tether from everyone hit by that orb that goes to and connects to the boss. while progressing through that phase, the topic of what the hell is that purple tether came up so many times. What is the purpose of that tether? Does it just tell you who sucks? Does it just tell you who triggered the orb in accident? Because at the time of early prog, you're trying to avoid the orbs. Damage bad, avoidable damage good, avoid damage. They never did anything in this fight without reason. That is one thing that this dev did very well. Nothing in this fight exists without reason. The only oversight in the entire fight that exists without reason is the fact that you can late awaken Garuda. That is the only oversight in the entire fight. Everything else exists for a reason, and that damn purple tether in Annihilation exists for a big reason. The amount of purple tethers spawned by an orb in Annihilation creates a purple tether of an equivalent length, or I shouldn't say equivalent, of a corresponding length to the number of people you soaked those green orbs with in Annihilation. The more people you soak an orb with in Annihilation, the longer the tether of these orbs you have to soak before they explode. Mind fucking blown. Unreal moment in Prague. Hats, I just want to clap. Totally cool interaction. Totally cool. It's just such an amazing interaction. Think about it. Every time you soak an orb in Annihilation, you gain 1 additional ether. You want to minimize the amount of ether you gain throughout the fight. You walk this fine balancing act of minimizing the amount of ether you take in Annihilation phase by soaking orbs with as few people as you deem possible, while also giving yourself enough of a tether linked here to do this mechanic cleanly. Now, the tethers that you're seeing on your screen right now, these are 1 stacks. This is the result of me solo soaking those orbs in Annihilation. We found, and Team Wheelchair found, that if you use Sprint and a lot of pre-shielding, 1 stacking the orbs is enough time to get from tether to tether and resolve the soaks, in enough time. It is a bit hectic, and the entropy strategy of creating longer tethers at the cost of producing a bit more Aether Gauge is definitely more safe and much less chaotic and much more manageable. It is a truly pick your poison environment. Do you want a worse Aether Gauge? I haven't spoken much about the Aether Gauge yet, so this will be a really good time to segue. But do you want a worse Aether Gauge for easier orbs, or do you want a better Aether Gauge for harder orbs? I think people are a little bit split on which they feel is better. My personal feeling on the matter is that because the orbs with short tethers are manageable, I would much prefer to take the better Aether Gauge, just because I think that the Aether Gauge plays a bigger has a bigger impact on the ending of the fight. But that being said, both ways are proven doable. So whichever your team prefers, honestly. You'll note that I mentioned earlier in the Annihilation phase that the final orb we actually double soak, and there's a reason for that. So these orbs that we're soaking on screen right now, these behave similar to all the other iterations of Ultima. They're party soaked orbs. The more people you soak them with, the less damage the party takes, the more damage they split. My preferred strategy for this is a 2-6 split, with the group of 2 being your 2 tanks. Your 2 tanks just pop some cooldowns, and they get knocked back into their orbs, and they take their orbs together, and the remaining 6 members of the party take their orbs as a group of 6. That's the strategy that I prefer the most. I know that Team Wheelchair did a 4-4 split. I believe Entropy did a 2-6, but don't quote me on that. I don't want to speak for them. But they did an entirely different tether strategy, so it's kind of not the same thing anyway. But the importance of the fact that I did a double soaked orb at the end of Annihilation is you'll be able to see it maybe when Miyu turns his camera. Not quite. But what the double soak does is it allows a bit of a longer tether for your tanks. the longer tether for those tanks is used to basically allow your healers to throw instants and top the tanks up in between orbs if necessary. It's just a safety measure. And it's a safety measure that we put in place because we saw that there's literally no reason not to. Because I want to explain the Aether Gauge and the impact of the Aether Gauge. Every player hit by the orbs in Annihilation gives 1 Aether Gauge. So if you have 2 players hit by an Aether Gauge, it gives +2. If you have 2 players hit by an orb, it gives +2. If you have 1 player hit by an orb, it gives +1. If you have 5 players hit by an orb, it gives +5. What the Aether Gauge is when Ultima Weapon reaches 100 gauge, and he's going to be gradually gaining gauge throughout this final phase. There's going to be a burn period at the end of the phase where he just starts channeling his Aether Gauge and building it to 100. When he reaches 100, that's Enrage. So, the less Aether Gauge you have going into this phase, the more time you have until Enrage. This is just an incredibly well done mechanic. I cannot emphasize that enough. The fact that you can, it's like a pick your poison. Do you want a messier Enrage, but an easier set of orbs, or do you want a harder set of orbs, or an easier Enrage? I think that's just awesome. Just total hats off to Square Enix's developers and whoever specifically designed this fight. It's really well done. But the final moments of this phase, you're gonna see Ultima start channeling, and he's gonna be building 2 Aether Gauge per second. Now notice what I said. He's gaining specifically 2 Aether Gauge per second, which means he's operating on even numbers. He's gonna go from 36 to 38 to 40, all the way up to 98, 100. Entering the phase at 36 and 37 is virtually the exact same thing, because ending at 98 and 99 is the exact same thing. It's still 2 seconds to 100. So in my eyes, there's literally, if you're doing a single stacks of orbs, there's literally no reason not to 2-stack one of the orbs. It's the same amount of time till the Enrage, and I felt that the 2-stack on the tank set of orbs is the best thing to do, because it can get a bit messy for your tanks there if you're not popping a ton of cooldowns, and you really don't want to overcommit a ton of cooldowns because you need cooldowns for this final phase. So it allow your healers to get off a Lustrate or a Benny, or honestly they even have time for an Adlo. You with a 2-stacked Tether, you have enough time for an Adlo, honestly. So it gives you plenty of time to pop the orbs in a controlled manner. But just totally cool phase, and I just cannot emphasize that enough. And I mentioned earlier, obviously, that any death in the Ultima Weapon phases is +4 Aether Gauge, so think about that. If you have any deaths reaching this point, you're weakening your chances at making the Enrage. Just another really cool design. I think that they saw how people were just honestly just chain resing their way through the Bahamut trios and still making all the checks, and they were like, I don't want any of that in my next Ultimate. So just a really cool anti-death mechanic, anti-sack mechanic. Big fan. So we've seen all the new mechanics of the fight at this point. At this point, Ultimate Weapon is around the 40% mark, and we're going to be entering the final set of burn, the final burn phase here, and we're going to be seeing a bunch of recurring mechanics, mechanics that are not new. We've seen them before, but there's going to be a lot of damage happening. So throughout this final phase, the 3 primals are going to be returning to the fight one by one, and the order in which they return is going to be random. However, all 3 primals will appear once. When each primal returns, they do specific mechanics from their tool set. Garuda will open when Garuda enters the map. She will open with her Awaken Wicked Wheel combo, which is the Wicked Wheel into Dynamo, and it'll be Wicked Wheel into the Dynamo into her channeling her ultimate ability Aerial Blast. And then she'll leave the arena and leave behind a Feather Rain. Each primal that enters the arena ends their cycle with their ultimate attack. Titan's Earthen Fury, Ifrit's Hellfire, Garuda's Aerial Blast. And these primals that are on the map are untargetable, which means you're not able to apply targeted mitigation, which means these ultimates hit pretty damn hard. So you need untargeted mitigation tactics to defend yourself against these ultimate attacks from these primals, and this is where soil has a lot of strength. The time between ultimate attacks actually works out so that you can soil 1 and 3, and you just don't have a soil for 2. And then on 2, you can use things like Shake It Off, Divine Veil, POA. You really need Sucker plus X to survive an ultimate attack. The tank needs a little bit more than that because they're taking the magical boss autos while they're being hit by the primal ultimates. So if you're tanking this, you really do need a cooldown for each ultimate, or like a really strong intervention or something. So at least something going into an ultimate as a tank. The only other thing besides the primal mechanics that's happening is Ultima is going to apply 3 of those Aether time bombs on 3 random targets. And to my knowledge, it's completely random. There may be set patterns, but it's not like it's role based. It's not like one's tank, one's healer, one's DPS. We've had them on like no tanks. We've had them sometimes go on tanks. It seems to me it's just 3 random party members. And these time bombs are different in that they're not 10 seconds duration. These ones have varied durations. One of them is like 50 seconds, the other is like 30 seconds, and the other one's 10 seconds. And what will happen is there's your static timers that will explode during static portions of the primal dances. So like one bomb will go off as you're moving into Garuda's Wicked Wheel. One bomb will go off as you are dodging Titan's Way to the Lands. Another bomb will go off as you've stacked after Ifrit uses eruptions. You'll see those play out, and remember that these time bombs are party soaks, so as long as your party is centralized together, you'll be okay. If you're a tank stacking in for these, you need to be careful. You're taking that extra damage in addition to the boss autos, followed by a primal ultimate. It's a lot of damage. So again, needs to be cooled out. Because the spawn locations of the primals is pretty much static, you can actually completely make your positioning for this phase entirely static. We're going to choose to put the boss north at A, with the boss's ass facing A, with the tank in the center of the room. And we're going to be ping-ponging basically from the A marker and the 1 intercardinal marker. And that's mostly due to what Ifrit forces us into. Ifrit's going to spawn on the intercardinal opposite of 1, adjacent to 1 rather. So you want to be away from that area. And then because Ifrit does an Awoken charge, we know that the cross charge following his dive is going to be affecting the cardinals. So ending on 1 is really important for Ifrit. You'll see that play out. The Garuda, we highlighted is just the Wicked Wheel movement with the Dynamo. And Titan is actually, surprisingly to everyone's surprise, there's no landslides. It is strictly and purely a weighted land movement. So this burn is really straightforward. The key to this phase is keeping your tank alive and burning hard. This DPS check is not to be taken lightly. So Miyu actually received one of the time bombs. You can see he has the middle one. This is the 30-second duration one. So his will be exploding during the second primal. So Ifrit is the first. So, oh, I'm sorry. There's actually no. I actually forgot. There's Let me rectify something I said that was incorrect. There is only 1 set of Ifrit charges here. I forgot. And the only set of Ifrit charges is the cross dash, and it just goes in the cardinals. So you just need to end on the intercardinal 1. So at the end of that phase, you saw Ifrit's Hellfire. Garuda has now entered the map. This is the second primal. Miyuni's time bomb should be exploding as we move in for the Wicked Wheel. I receive an APOC here as a tank. This is a lot of damage on me here. There's the Aerial Blast. Garuda's going to teleport away. Every time Garuda teleports away, Feather Rain. To end the phase, you have the final primal. Remember, this order is random. It just so happens that our final primal is Titan. So we're going to be ping-ponging Way to the Lands. And in my opinion, this phase is the most damage, surprisingly, even though there's the least mechanics, because it's the most movement. This Earth and Fury here is scary. Now that all 3 primals are done, Ultima teleports away and starts channeling to fill his Aether Breach. And at this point, it's a burn. It's you or him. No, buffer! Anticlimactic finish. Okay, okay, you two. So when he reaches 100 Aether here, he's going to enter his enrage, and what his enrage is, he's going to start stunning players and killing them one by one. He's going to first stun the 2 healers in a random order, and then he's going to first stun and kill the 2 tanks, and then finally he's going to stun the final 4 DPS one by one and kill them one by one. Completely random order. But it always goes healers, tanks, DPS. And this is just a burn, you just have to kill him before he kills you. One of the coolest enrages in the game. Just a really cool, interaction there, and just an awesome final phase. I think. I think the actual execution of the final phase is pretty simple compared to maybe other final phases of other bosses. However, just in the notion of the fact of the tight DPS check and racing to the death basically to the end of the fight, it's fun. I don't know, it's just a really fun encounter. That's the best way I can describe it. But that is Ultimate Weapon in its entirety. That was a lot to go over. I don't know how much time we spent on that. Looks like that was actually a 2.5 hour discussion. It did not feel like 2.5 hours. My thoughts on the fight in its entirety. I feel that the solving of the mechanics and the figuring out of the mechanics in this fight is nothing like any other fights they've produced so far. I think in terms of difficulty wise and in solving the mechanics, the level of ingenuity you need to solve this fight is higher than needed in other encounters. I think that the actual execution of the mechanics, once you solve them, is probably a little bit easier than UCOB. I think UCOB tires you out a bit more and has a bit more punishing, auto wipe mechanics. I think of twisters. I think of the Terror Flare phase of like the strict boss positionings, the Iron Chariots and stuff. I think the execution side of things is a little bit more strict in UCOB. But overall, I prefer the style of requiring more ingenuity to solve mechanics rather than just requiring pinpoint execution. That being said, I prefer this fight to UCOB, but just a really enjoyable experience. I just can't praise them enough for the design that went into this encounter. It is probably an encounter that groups will clear a bit faster than they did clear UCOB now that strategies are being posted, and I just made a damn video about it. So I've completely lost my voice at this point. But I had a lot of fun going through that with you guys, and I hope that I touched on all the points of the fight that people wanted to see, and maybe shed some light on some mechanics that weren't easily perceivable just by watching a video and stuff. Because that's really why I do these videos after Prague. I like to highlight the things that aren't necessarily perceivable by just the naked eye watching a video. That's the fight in its entirety, guys. So I think at this point, for the purpose of the YouTube video, I'll wrap this up, and then the remainder of the stream will just be some short Q&A, and then we'll close up shop. Thank you for watching if you're watching this from YouTube, and I'll catch you next time. And for everybody here still on stream, we can transition into some Q&A about the fight.